Mass Effect changed RPGs. When the first entry of BioWare's sci-fi epic released in 2007 to universal acclaim, it was accompanied by an understanding that we were witnessing the evolution of the role-playing genre. It was time to say goodbye to systemic-driven design, no more dice rolls or detached perspectives. Now was the era of action combat, fully voiced dialogue and cinematic set pieces. Mass Effect dazzled with its movie-like level of presentation that was able to whisk players away on a galaxy-spanning adventure featuring distant planets and exotic aliens, all built on top of layers of carefully constructed world-building and engrossing space mysteries. The series went on to be hailed as one of the greatest role-playing experiences ever made, with one of the most highly regarded settings in gaming and a near-endless list of accolades, from perfect review scores and Game of the Year awards to fan tributes and alternative media spin-offs. Years later, its legacy endures as a lasting testament to its ability to capture players' hearts and minds. But it never captured mine. I was never a Mass Effect fan, which might not be the best thing to say at the start of a 2-hour-plus critical exploration of the series, but I guess I'm hoping to win people over along the way. I mean, it's the journey that counts, not the introduction. Still, there are two things to keep in mind here. The first is that I should have been a fan, and I don't mean that as an acknowledgement that I have now finally seen the lens-flared light. I mean that in 2007, I was a BioWare believer. I'd been a fan of the developer since I first played Baldur's Gate, and I'd continued to enjoy each of their games released since. I was also someone who played lots of RPGs, and was in no way jaded enough, at that stage of my life, to not be looking forward to the next big thing. And I didn't have a problem with sci-fi, or shooting, or space sex, or anything else important to this series either, so by all measurable metrics, I should have been perfectly primed to enjoy these games. But I didn't. The second thing you need to understand was that this was a long time ago. My first experience with this series was 14 years back, and the last experience I had was when the third game released in 2012. A lot has happened since then. Enough time has passed that I've been able to transition from the joys of feeling too young to the joys of feeling too old. When Mass Effect first released, I hadn't even escaped the grasps of puberty, and now I'm old enough to be able to look into a mirror in the morning and play the "was this grey hair here yesterday" game, as I try in vain to quantify the precise demise of my youthfulness. It is a substantial passage of time, but I would like to believe that at least some of it has been well spent. For starters, I now have a vastly expanded appreciation of the sci-fi genre, having read many authors, from Asimov and Aldous to Herbert and Heinlein, authors that I'm not even sure I was aware of back in 2007. And I've also seen more films and played more games, and hopefully developed a more cultured and critical understanding of the sci-fi genre. I've also played and replayed a lot of RPGs, and I've had many new disappointments over the years of the kind that can lend a much more enriched sense of perspective. Most of all though, I'd like to believe that I've grown as a person since I first stepped foot on the SR-1 Normandy all those years ago. And I'm a big enough man now to admit that maybe I wasn't always a big enough man in the past. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I was hating on something that was popular because it was popular. Maybe my dislike of it was just a reaction to a video game genre I cared about moving in a direction that didn't appeal specifically to me. And maybe I was just wrong. Maybe I missed out. And maybe it's not too late to make amends. So, with the release of a new remastered edition, and with a healthy amount of requests from an audience that I'm probably more beholden to than I'd like to admit, it seemed the time had finally come to retake the role of Commander Shepard, to save the galaxy all over again, and to give this self-proclaimed legendary series one last chance. This time, though, I would know what to expect, and go in with an open mind, one that's older, wiser and more experienced. Expect spoilers, and war crimes, and an inevitable unravelling of mental state before an ending that will be profound, to at least one person watching, but that person might be you. There's really only one way to find out. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to go back to where it all began and talk about my original playthrough. Mass Effect is the story of Commander Shepard, and it's a story I'm hoping you have at least some familiarity with, because this video will focus on examining that story more than retelling it, even if there will be reminders along the way. Still, one thing that people don't need a reminder of is who Commander Shepard is. The protagonist of this trilogy is an icon, recognisable through name, voice, and a ruggedly handsome default appearance. This was a bit of a departure for a genre which often aimed to provide the blankest of slates for players to project themselves upon and mould in whatever image most pleased them. Instead, the character of Shepard is more of a continuous negotiation between player freedom and creative direction. Shepard speaks with their own voice and acts with their own semblance of a personality, even if there's still room left for players to control that personality in the form of dialogue choices. Whether RPG protagonists should be voiced or silent is a contentious issue. There were voiced protagonists before Mass Effect, of course, Deus Ex being one such highly acclaimed example, even if that was a game where actions often spoke louder than words, but Mass Effect marked the moment where voiced protagonists really started being seen as the norm. There can be advantages to both voiced and silent protagonists. For example, if a character is visible in dialogue or cutscenes, and is interacting with other voiced characters, it might seem weird and immersion breaking for that character to not speak like everyone else on screen does. On the other hand, a silent protagonist can better create the feeling that your character is a surrogate for yourself, rather than being a separate character who you only control, and this sense of ownership might increase immersion or just better serve a narrative where player expression is important. Mass Effect does voice its protagonist well, and I imagine very few would argue that using a voice protagonist in these games was a mistake. But, at the same time, it's hard to deny that this is Commander Shepard's story, not yours, and that you control Shepard rather than become them. This approach complements the cinematic presentation, and players might even find they enjoy Shepard as a character. But players do have to give up a little bit of ownership of the story in return. As a trilogy, Mass Effect makes plenty of trade-offs like this, and it's through understanding these trade-offs that you might come to understand my initial reaction to the series. The best way to show this is to look at the dialogue wheel. The wheel is well regarded as one of the greatest inventions in human history. The dialogue wheel might have a less successful legacy, but it was certainly a bold departure for its time. No longer would players choose from a list of exact responses. Now they would only need to choose a type of response via brief, conveniently arranged summaries, where the location of a dialogue choice tells you as much, if not more, than the actual words on screen. Mass Effect uses the same 3 types of responses in each encounter, where a friendly or helpful option appears on top, with a neutral option in the middle, and a hostile or rude one on the bottom. The shorter text and familiar placements speed up the fully voiced dialogue by removing much of the downtime players might have previously spent reading each option, while also providing an easy-to-understand user interface. One needs not worry about what to say, only how they want to say it, and the only thing you need to pay attention to know how a dialogue response will sound is its position around the wheel. In short, the dialogue wheel was a simplification of one of the core parts of role-playing games, and this change was made to better meet the needs of the more modern and cinematic style of game that BioWare wanted to create. And the critic response to this change was rapturous applause. In their original review of the first game, IGN called it one of Mass Effect's greatest successes, saying that players would have trouble going back to any RPG that put static text on screen. I have went back to many RPGs that have static text on screen, and while there are many things in my life I have had trouble going back to, games with static text have never been one of them. And IGN's statements weren't unique. The same sentiment can be seen in many other critical responses to this game. Back when Mass Effect first released, a voiced protagonist, accompanied by a dialogue wheel, was seen as a universally positive change. But while it might be true that this system was a better fit for the type of game BioWare were trying to create, there were downsides. For starters, not being allowed to see exactly what you're about to say may lead players to selecting things they didn't actually want to say, and in some situations, this might be important. There's also a loss of nuance with the choices themselves, as rather than each dialogue choice providing its own unique set of options, they now feature the same 3 different tonal selections every single time. It's not unreasonable to assume that someone playing as a helpful character might pick the top helpful option in every single situation. This might make the dialogue choices presented by the game no longer feel like a series of different choices, but instead just one choice that's asked multiple times. And the impacts of a dialogue wheel aren't just limited to the player either, you also need to consider the writer. Being forced to follow the same template in all situations vastly reduces creative freedom. In life, there are more responses to a situation than helpful, neutral, or hostile, but the writers are left with virtually no way to account for this within the constraints of Mass Effect's wheel. And I'm sure criticism of the dialogue wheel could be taken even further if you really wanted, but it's not actually the wheel itself that's so important here. It's what the wheel represents, and how people responded to it. Mass Effect's dialogue wheel was a simplification of role-playing dialogue, and it came with its own advantages and disadvantages, and yet it was presented as an innovative step into the future. This was role-playing evolution, and only those blinded by nostalgia of a bygone era would ever be foolish enough to speak against it. And yet in 2015, when the Fallout franchise evolved to feature a voiced protagonist with a similar dialogue wheel, many fans hated it. You could argue this is because of the quality of writing in Fallout 4, or the quality of voice acting, or even because of the suitability of the franchise. It doesn't really matter. The point is, the narrative of a linear evolution into a glorious future was always flawed, as it's a narrative that's forced to turn its back on everything that gets lost along the way, and, for some people, that which was lost mattered. And I guess what I'm saying here is that in 2007, I was some people. And so I resented Mass Effect for moving in a direction that didn't appeal to me personally, and I resented it even more for receiving universal praise for doing so. And it's not like this is a matter of only voiced protagonists and dialogue wheels. Mass Effect also abandoned tactical gameplay in favour of third-person shooting, which made a lot of sense as in the mid-2000s, shooters were the most popular genre in gaming, and third-person shooters were the hot new thing. And Mass Effect's first attempt at action gameplay left much to be desired. Still, Mass Effect 1 was really just the start of BioWare's bold move into the future. In many ways, this game stood at the precipice of old and new. Mass Effect 2, however, wasted no time in putting both feet firmly on the new side of the equation. It removed the inventory system, armor types, in-depth leveling, non-combat skills, multiple solutions to quests, and the entirety of planetary exploration. And how did critics respond to this? Was this the moment some started to question whether BioWare had gone too far? Did I get my vindication? Of course not. They responded by making Mass Effect 2 BioWare's most highly reviewed game of all time, and everything that was removed was justified as skillful streamlining or masterful innovation, with Mass Effect 2 going on to win the majority of Game of the Year awards in a year that was hardly lacking when it came to competition. Mass Effect 3 would take things even further, fully embracing the series' new status as an action game over an RPG, right down to tacked-on multiplayer. It wasn't until the ending of Mass Effect 3 that BioWare started to receive any sort of pushback for their handling of the series, but when that long-awaited moment finally came, it wasn't for any changes in tone or style or design. It was due to a disappointing ending that's main reason for being so disappointing was that it failed to live up to the sky-high expectations the rest of the series had built in its player base, and so even that was something I couldn't really participate in. And so my experience with the Mass Effect series was one of disillusionment at game critics that I previously respected, alienation from a fanbase that I previously felt a part of, and betrayal from a developer who I previously believed in. Saying that now, all these years later, makes my attitude towards these games back then sound a little bit childish, and it probably was. But it's not like I was entirely unjustified in my opposition. Critics weren't wrong when they said Mass Effect was the future of RPGs, but they were wrong to present the future as something that always brings positive changes. In hindsight, this is something that's obviously not true, even in fields relating to ever-advancing technology like video games. Nobody likes it when headphone jacks are removed from their phones, or when single-player games don't work without an internet connection, or when new monetization methods have a greater and greater negative impact on players' experiences. And nobody has ever said the words, "Hey, a new version of Windows, I'm really looking forward to that." Yeah, I'm looking at you, Windows 11. I know you're coming, and I don't like it. Change needs to be scrutinized, progress needs to be held accountable, and evolution is hardly a smooth and flawless process. So, maybe evolution isn't something we should always be aspiring to. Life isn't a game of Pokemon, and even if it were, Pikachu doesn't evolve. If that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what will. Anyway, it wasn't just RPGs that were going through a period of evolution. It was all of gaming, and through that evolution, entire genres died or were discarded or lost many of their defining characteristics. Cinematic action games were in the ascendancy, and other genres often had to get with the times or make way. And this did lead to a greater amount of homogenization in the late noughties. But none of this was Mass Effect's fault. It was part of a trend, not the cause. A product of its time, not something guilty of crimes against its genre. And isn't such a contextual assessment kind of missing the point anyway? Fans of the Mass Effect series don't like it because it changed RPGs, they like it for other reasons, like characters, setting, and story, and these reasons are perfectly valid. By changing the role-playing genre, Mass Effect was able to reach a new audience, but it didn't win that audience through sleight of hand or trickery. Mass Effect has its own qualities that make it stand out, and I know this. I've always known this. There was a reason I played Mass Effect 2 and 3 rather than just abandoning the series. There were parts of this series I always loved, from alien designs and atmosphere to soundtrack and setting. And I want to have that great experience that so many others had with these games. So, now it seemed like time to put the past behind me and step into the shoes of Commander Shepard once again. This time I would go in with realistic expectations, and judge these games on the basis of what they are, rather than what they aren't. And now, after years of self-induced disappointment, I would finally be able to put everything right and become the Mass Effect fan I was always meant to be. At least, that's what I thought. So, here we are. The year is 2021. The writing style of this video is changing from past to present tense, and the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect has finally been released. I am still playing the original versions of the games, however. After all, it's the original games I'm trying to make amends with, and maybe there'll be time for the Legendary Edition later. I'm also playing as a female Shepard who is usually choosing Paragon responses. The reason for this is that in my original playthrough I was a male Shepard who usually went Renegade, so I thought doing the inverse might mean I get more out of the experience. In that past Renegade playthrough, I envisioned my character as an ends justify the means kind of guy, someone who wanted to do the right thing and sometimes did, but someone who could also be careless and cruel. A man arrogant over their self-importance and selfish in their actions, but someone who could and would save the galaxy as many times as needed, if only because no one else would be up to the task. At least that's what I thought I was going for. There's a chance I just wanted to sleep with blue aliens and punch reporters, and thought renegade characters would get to have the most fun. This time though, everything would be different. Reporters were going to be positively respected, and there would be no time to sleep with anyone because time spent fornicating is time that could be spent saving people. This time, I would embody the ideal of the paragon, and I would approach every situation with a sincere and earnest desire to help. All lives in the galaxy would matter to me, even those ugly bat guys and the annoying jellyfish. No problem would be too small, no needless sacrifice would be accepted, and there would be no taking the easy way out, because I wasn't going to need easy ways out. My name is Commander Shepard, and I am just that fucking good. Hello world, I hope you're ready to be saved. Still, great things must start with humble beginnings, so let's begin, and I'll do my best to start being a bit more humble. From the opening cutscene, Mass Effect wastes no time in showcasing just how far BioWare had come at presenting 3D worlds since their first attempt with Neverwinter Nights 5 years earlier. Video game technology has come a long way since Mass Effect first released, but much about the original game's presentation still holds up today. From its realistic character models to its accurate facial animations and lip syncing, Mass Effect still often looks better than many games which released later, thanks largely to its strong sense of style, with dynamic camera angles, high quality lighting, and an original score that oscillates between moody synthesizers and sweeping orchestral pieces. To effectively meet the needs of any given moment. Mass Effect was a game that knew how to create atmosphere, and even if this is one of the first Western RPGs to put quite so much emphasis on the cinematic, it still did so with competence. Not everything has aged gracefully, however, and minutes after beginning your first mission, you'll soon start to notice this. It's hardly a controversial criticism by this point, but it still needs to be acknowledged that Mass Effect has some rather unsatisfying shooting. Each shot lacks impact, with little to no recoil and fairly muted sound effects. This is accompanied by an oversized aiming reticule, which is used to represent your lack of accuracy, and means early game bullets can miss their target regardless of how accurately the player aims. You can witness this by shooting at the ground and paying attention to the spread out locations of the dust clouds this produces. With skill point investment, your character's accuracy stat does improve and your reticule shrinks, but some weapons, like every sniper rifle in the game, can still feel like unwieldy messes even if you heavily invest into them. Sniping in this game feels a bit like you're looking through the scope of your gun while sat atop a galloping horse. As a third-person shooter, you'll also need to make use of cover to provide moments of respite. The way you automatically enter and exit cover by moving towards or away from it can sometimes feel a little clunky, but otherwise cover works okay, even if it does slow down the pace of combat by encouraging players to carefully sit in one place, only shooting when safe. In addition to guns, you do have access to a small number of other combat abilities, including grenades, buffs, tech skills, and biotics. Of these, biotics are the clear winners. These are the Mass Effect universe's version of telekinetic powers, with force pulls and lifts that can be as entertaining as they are effective, and seeing enemies slowly flying across the battlefield never loses its appeal, even when many other parts of the combat do. Still, overall, Mass Effect 1's combat leaves a lot to be desired. With later attempts, BioWare would improve this part of the experience remarkably, but one area they never got right was the tactical side of combat. I remember reading a preview of this game in a magazine before its release, where the ability to control your squad mates through commands was presented as a core part of the experience that was going to be crucial to the player's success, as if each combat encounter presented its own unique strategic puzzle for players to overcome. In the actual game, however, this isn't true at all. You can pause combat at any time to issue commands, but doing so feels ineffective. The camera is locked to your character, so you can only give orders relating to places you can rotate the camera to aim at, and doing so is slow and clunky. And as squad mates tend to do good enough by themselves, the added tactical dimensions provided by this don't seem to serve much purpose. But people don't hold this game in high regards because of its gameplay, and I can overlook some sloppy shooting. I mean, I've got a galaxy to save. So, let's talk about that instead. The year is 2183. It's been 35 years since humanity discovered the first mass relay, an ancient faster-than-light enabling device that now litter the galaxy, connecting different star systems, and were left behind by a previous spacefaring civilization. Humanity also discovered new friends, so they went to war. It was called the First Contact War, and hey, they started it. Fortunately, for them, the galaxy's de facto governing body, the Council, stepped in to give both sides a timeout, and before long we were playing nice with the rest of the space kiddies. Still, despite humanity's integration into the galactic community, resentments still linger, with many of the other species viewing humanity as reckless upstarts who have expanded too far, too fast, and might present a threat to galactic stability, and with humans begrudging their lack of respect, in particular when it comes to being granted a seat on the esteemed council, a privilege only given to the most premium of races. Of which there are three. The short-lived, fast-talking Solarians who excel at all things academic, except finding ways to live past the age of 40. The alluringly blue monogender Asari, who by contrast can live for over 1,000 years and can mate with species of any race or gender. They're also the best in the galaxy at making friends. Whether there is a connection between that and the mating thing, I'll let you decide. And the final council race is the Taurians. They look cool. And that's it, that's all there is to say about them. BioWare gave every race unique characteristics and identities, but when it came to the Taurians, they just figured, who needs that stuff when you look this good? Of course, there are more races than those with seats on the council, some of which have smaller roles to play in this story, but even the less important races manage to feel very memorable thanks to their strong design and unique characteristics. There are two more non-council races that deserve special mention, however. The first are the Krogan, a warrior race from a brutal planet named Tuchanka, who were uplifted by the Solarians for their prowess in battle during an earlier conflict known as the Rachni War. This war ended with the insect-like Rachni going extinct, and the Krogans becoming a celebrated part of the galactic community, with access to galactic technology that allowed them to spread beyond their hostile homeworld. But without the harsh conditions of Tuchanka to suppress their growth, the Krogans' naturally very high birth rates led their population to explode as the species spread from uninhabited planet to uninhabited planet, until there was no more uninhabited planets left to spread to. And yet, their population kept rising, alongside their need to find more and more resources to support it. This led to a war that lasted decades, during which the Krogan were able to fight through the massive casualties they suffered as a result of their incredibly high birth rates. The Council's solution to this was the genophage, a biological superweapon that spread within the Krogan, leaving only 1 in 1,000 births successful. With this, the Krogan were defeated, but that defeat wouldn't end with their surrender, and for the next 1,000 years this once great race would slowly wither away as their numbers steadily declined and their attitudes turned to resentment, fatalism, and apathy. The story of the Krogan and the genophage plays a key part in this trilogy, but it's also an example of BioWare's world building at its very best. With the Krogan, the writers have taken an interesting what-if scenario of what happens to a species with high reproduction capabilities that undergoes a rapid increase in technology, and then taken that scenario to one of its possible logical conclusions. This is then realistically interwoven into the backstory of the universe in a way that can allow differing perspectives surrounding an unresolved conflict, while still leaving room for this issue to be explored further by future games. The Krogan and the Genophage make for an interesting story that's also able to set up further interesting stories, and this trilogy will take full advantage of that. Another example of this can be seen with the Quarians, recognisable by their sophisticated envirosuits that they have to wear at all times due to a weakened immune system, who once created the robotic Geth. In the world of Mass Effect, artificial intelligence is strictly outlawed due to its perceived danger. But while the Quarians followed Council guidance when they first created the Geth as servants, with time they modified their creation to perform more and more complex tasks, creating a neural network between individual Geth in the process for increased efficiency, which eventually allowed the Geth to develop sentience. In fear, the Quarians turned on their creations, but the Geth fought back, expelling the Quarians from their homeworld and turning them into a nomadic species that wanders the galaxy aboard a giant flotilla of salvaged ships called the Migrant Fleet. The Geth are one of the main enemies the player will fight in this series, but they'll end up being much more than that. Still, that's all of the most important races. For now. In summary, if this was a game of civilization, the Solarians would be the ones going for a wide science victory, the Quarians would be going for a tall science victory, the Asari would be going for a diplomatic victory, and the Turians military, with the Krogans being the other military race that got a bit too uppity in the mid-game, only to find themselves getting nuked into oblivion at the start of the late game. Humans then, I suppose, are the Civ that spent most of the game on an unknown separate continent, only to meet up with everyone later on after most of the best parts of the game have already happened. And here we are, in the year 2183, where a yet unseen player is about to decide they've had enough of this particular game and tries to delete the save file. So we'll get to that. Mass Effect's setting is one of its strongest parts. To find some of this lore, you'll have to search through codex entries, which, despite the quality of the information itself, is admittedly not a very engaging way to acquire such information. Still, much of the lore is communicated in-game through speaking to NPCs, progressing through the main story, and talking to your companions, who just so happen to represent each of the most important races, bar the Solarians. Still, even if you were to ignore all lore and never even glance at the codex, on visual design alone, these species feel memorable and distinctive. Mass Effect really does do a great job with its aliens, and considering this is a new IP that players will enter with no prior attachment to, it was crucial that BioWare were able to pull players in through the strength of their setting, as the narrative wouldn't work as well otherwise. Mass Effect requires curiosity to get the most out of it. It needs you to want to uncover the galaxy's mysteries, and even knowing so many of the answers to those important questions, I still found myself happy to read about this universe all over again as a result of the setting's high quality. As for the actual narrative, we must return to Commander Shepard, who has been sent to a distant human colony called Eden Prime to recover a recently unearthed artifact, only to discover hostile Geth who have been mounting the locals on big spikes that replace their insides with cybernetic material to create these synthetic organic zombies referred to as husks. It's pretty metal, and things go from bad to worse when a Turian Spectre named Saren shows up in league with the Geth. Saren, unaware of Shepard's presence, shoots his colleague and sets the artifact to explode, but you defuse the explosives and reach the artifact yourself, only to receive a confusing vision of death and destruction. The artifact is a beacon built by the Protheans, a long-since departed spacefaring race thought to have been the ones to build the mass relays, as well as the heart of galactic civilization, the Citadel, and this vision seems to show what might have caused that departure. Still, exact answers will have to wait, as Shepard and the Normandy head to the Citadel to warn the Council about Saren's betrayal. Your arrival at this colossal space station / floating city is one of those great underappreciated Mass Effect moments. Here, the soundtrack and cinematics work in tandem to show you exactly what this setting is all about. A sense of wonder is important to sci-fi. I mean, under the science fiction Wikipedia article, sense of wonder gets its own heading, which, hopefully, speaks for itself. This is a genre that focuses on the future and its vast multitude of different possibilities. In the words of a guy I found on Wikipedia, science fiction is about the combination of the rational and the believable with the miraculous, and the first Mass Effect might understand this better than any other game in the series. Once you land on the Citadel, the player is allowed to freely roam this location, picking up side quests and diving into intergalactic politics. The Citadel isn't one of the largest, flashiest, or most action-packed locations I've ever journeyed through in an RPG, but it still manages to be incredibly memorable, mostly because it serves as your first true introduction to the setting. And one of the things you soon get introduced to here is the anti-human sentiment many aliens have for the newest member of the Galactic Club. This isn't a hugely original idea, but it makes sense that aliens might view a new species with distrust, and it makes humans feel more unique and interesting in a setting where they otherwise might be at risk of being outshone by everyone else. Anti-human sentiment is also relevant to the main story, as reporting to the Council will show. Here, your tale of Saren's betrayal is met with total disbelief, all while a holographic Saren sits there taunting you by calling you a big dumb idiot.
But what can you expect from a human?
Saren despises humanity. That's why he attacked Eden Prime.
Your species needs to learn its place, Shepard.
At times, he seems one step away from holding his hand up in an L shape in front of his forehead and sticking his tongue out at you when the Council aren't looking. It's rather annoying. I feel like there should be a name for the trope the writers are employing here, but I don't know what that name is, so I fear I must name it myself. So, I shall call it No One Ever Believes Harry Potter Syndrome, where the author sets up a protagonist who the audience know is telling the truth and means well, only to then have the other characters, particularly authority figures, disbelieve them and ridicule them continuously, all while the reader becomes more and more sympathetic to the main character and enraged over the clear unfairness of the situation. I would say this is an effective storytelling trope at engaging the audience, except in the case of both Harry Potter and Mass Effect, the writers seem so in love with it that they end up running it slightly into the ground. You have many encounters with the Council over the course of this trilogy, and they will never seem to want to believe the things both Shepard and the player know to be true. Anyway, for now this leads to a side story where you try to find proof of Saren's misdeeds while on the Citadel, during which you pick up the rest of your soon-to-be iconic crew, and eventually uncover evidence that suggests Saren is motivated by trying to bring about the return of the Reapers, an ancient and mysterious race of machines that are meant to have wiped out all life in the galaxy, although most consider this little more than myth. Still, you present this evidence to the Council, who now believe you about Saren, but they still ridicule you for mentioning the Reapers.
Listen to what you're saying. Saren wants to bring back the machines that wiped out all life in the galaxy? Impossible. It has to be. Where did the Reapers go? Why did they vanish? How come we found no trace of their existence? If they were real...
Yeah, get used to that. Still, it's progress, and the Council also sees fit to promote Shepard to the rank of Spectre, the Mass Effect version of secret agents who operate above the law and report only to the Council. This makes Shepard the first ever human Spectre, which is an important milestone for humanity, as they're still trying to cement their place in the new galactic order and win a seat on the Council. And so, the stage is set. As a Spectre, you have free reign to journey the galaxy aboard the Normandy on a quest to stop Saren any way you see fit, which leads you to 4 individual episodic adventures, each on their own planet. You can also go to other planets and tackle other quests, often at the behest of a human alliance who seem grateful for a Spectre-level lackey to do some of their busy work. These side quests aren't particularly strong, and this optional galactic exploration does have its fair share of problems. You start at this expansive and inviting map of the Milky Way, but as you drill down into systems and planets, you soon find all exploration is limited to only one small square of each planet you can land on, which you traverse within your trusty Mako, a vehicle 1 part tank and 1 part pogo stick. The Mako is routinely lampooned for its gravity-defying mobility, poor aiming, and awkward controls. The excessively mountainous regions you seem to usually find yourself traversing do wear out their welcome, and the aiming does have serious problems, most notably being that you shoot where the Mako turret is facing, as opposed to where the aiming reticule is directed at. This makes aiming slow and unwieldy, particularly if slopes are involved, as sometimes it's just not possible to position the turret to point at the right elevation. When lots of enemies are firing at you, this can be infuriating, but there is a solution. If you zoom in, suddenly the aiming reticule is magically granted pinpoint accuracy. However, while this fixes the problem with the aiming, it replaces it with a new problem. The Mako moves in the direction it's facing, and in combat, survival comes down to keeping the Mako moving to avoid enemy fire. This is easy when you're not zoomed in, as simple movements back and forth are enough to allow you to avoid most incoming hits. Once you zoom in, however, you can no longer see the direction the Mako is facing, and the simple act of moving back and forth in a straight line becomes increasingly difficult. This forces you to switch between zoomed in to shoot, and zoomed out to move and stay safe, and where this would usually come down to one button press in most games, in Mass Effect you're forced to cycle through each of 4 zoom levels, meaning switching between zoomed in and zoomed out takes 4 slow button presses every single time. If players were allowed to zoom in and out with a single button press, I think that alone might be enough to prevent the majority of Mako-related deaths. It's a bit baffling how the awkwardness of this general control scheme could just be overlooked. It makes the Mako feel like a poorly thought out last-minute addition that was never properly tested, and there are other problems that support this idea too. Like how the shield on your Mako recharges stupidly slowly. In one mission I spent 6 minutes waiting for my shield to recharge. I was playing on hard, having already died once due to a seemingly unavoidable attack, and you aren't able to save at any point during this section, so I just played it safe, thinking, how long could it take to just wait and let my shield come back? Well, the answer was 6 minutes and 44 seconds. I'm not much of a get angry while playing games kind of guy, but the Mako has at times done its best to change that. As for the actual exploration in the Mako, it's a great idea that's always limited by the vast amount of repetition involved. Planets do look different from afar, but once you land you'll always be greeted to the same sized squares, filled with the same empty mountains and the same seemingly pointless types of collectibles, alongside 1 or 2 buildings, of which there are only 3 different interior variations that get repeated over and over again. The impact of this is that all planets quickly start to feel the same, and your time on them is almost always uninteresting. Even the side quests themselves can feel like filler due to how basic their stories often are. One side quest has you search for a lost data module. You find the crash site and somehow deduce it must have been stolen by the native alien monkeys, so you search groups of monkeys, which involves walking up to them and pressing the search button. There are lots of monkeys per group, and there are plenty of groups spread out around the map, so this will take a while unless you know exactly which monkey you need, and the right monkey is hidden enough to probably be one of the last you check. It took me 20 minutes, in fact, and then upon finding the correct monkey, some Geth spawn in to try to claim the module, and then you kill them, and that's that. There's no story to this, no choices, no memorable gameplay, just a repetitive task and a few generic enemies. I guess the module was somehow useful to someone. Maybe. There are more involved and unique side quests than this, but of every side quest in the game, this was the one I remember most clearly from my original playthrough, and it remains a perfect representation of what is wrong with much of the side content in this game. Still, for all of these many problems, there's still the seed of something incredible with the planetary exploration in the first Mass Effect. Going to new uncharted planets and exploring the galaxy is one of the most exciting and appealing concepts in gaming, and it's something few games have ever even tried. I mean, No Man's Sky was able to generate an unmanageable amount of hype without any kind of gameplay details, just by promising to deliver on this concept. And so, even in 2021, with all the problems this part of the game entails, it still doesn't stop there being something about the Mako sections that just grab you. There are moments when these planetscapes, with their unusual colour schemes and visibly unfamiliar stars, are able to conjure up so much atmosphere that they start to feel like they don't even need narrative or gameplay to feel worthwhile. Even the text descriptions of the planets that you can read before heading down were often enough to get my imagination running wild, and while Mass Effect 1 may not have come close to meeting this potential, it will always feel tragic how future games would just abandon the idea altogether. Outside of these side planets, there are also 4 planets connected to the main story. These have no open exploration and instead focus more on telling standalone stories that connect to your investigation of Saren. You rescue a Prothean expert, gaining your final squad member in the process, investigate an isolated research facility where you encounter the last of the previously believed extinct Rachni, and uncover the connection between a strangely behaving colony and their corporate sponsors that leads to a battle with a mind-controlling plant. These sections work well and are elevated by the addition of small side quests, moral choices, and more substantial narratives. On the final location, Vermeer, you discover Saren is developing a cure for the genophage to enlist the aid of the Krogan, leading to a potential conflict with your Krogan teammate Rex as you set out to destroy Saren's base and all the genophage-related research contained within. At the heart of this base, however, the story takes a dramatic turn as you make contact with Sovereign.
Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh. You touch my mind, fumbling in ignorance, incapable of understanding.
I don't think this is a VI.
There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
Everything that happens in this trilogy from this point on will be focused on the Reapers, and there might be points in this overarching Reaper-dominated narrative that can be criticised, but this reveal isn't one of them. It's here Mass Effect's story evolves from a fairly standard sci-fi thriller to something else entirely. The Reapers are ancient beings of unimaginable power that exist to harvest all advanced life in the galaxy every 50,000 years before returning to their slumber. They're revealed to be the ones who built the mass relays and the Citadel, all so life would advance along the path they need it to, and now it's time for them to reawaken and start the cycle anew, which has been Saren's real objective all along. So the stakes could not be any higher. The threat represented by the Reapers is all-encompassing. This scene doesn't suffer from an abundance of exposition either. Sovereign and the game's writers tell you no more than they need to, yet this short conversation is still able to display the huge gulf between life as you know it and the new form of life you've just discovered, in knowledge of the universe, in scales of time, and in certainty of motivation. This leaves you to conclude that such a gulf also likely exists in terms of power, which is reinforced by the way Sovereign just ends the conversation with you after it gets bored of talking. This encounter really does succeed at being intimidating, and the concept of the Reapers itself is fascinating. There's an idea in astronomy called the Fermi paradox, which is that if our understanding of the universe is correct, i.e. that it's big and been around a long time, then it makes sense that alien life should exist and that at some point it should have developed to an advanced enough level that it would spread through the galaxy. And yet, despite our best efforts, we can find no evidence of this having ever happened. A suggested response to this paradox is something called the Great Filter, which is the idea that there exists something that stops life in the universe from becoming advanced, which might exist in humanity's past, meaning we must have been exceedingly lucky to have already moved past it, and most other inhabitants of the galaxy must just be less lucky. Or possibly, and more likely, that the Great Filter lurks unseen, waiting for us in the future. Therefore, the reason we've seen no evidence of other life is that at some point, something ends it. And one day, it's surely going to happen to us too. It's a frightening idea, and it sounds a lot like the Reapers. If one of the things that makes science fiction so great is its combination of the rational and believable with the miraculous, then maybe you could say one of the things that makes sci-fi horror so great is the combination of the rational and believable with the horrifying. And that's what the Reapers tap into. They are cosmic horror. The threat they present is existential, and in the first conversation they really do seem very Lovecraftian. From Sovereign's claim that it's beyond mortal comprehension, to the visual design that seems to take inspiration from some giant sea creature, with the squid-shaped body and the tentacle-like appendages. And what can I say? I love the idea of the Reapers, and this moment is wonderful. It's the peak of the series in my eyes, and to fully appreciate it you almost have to forget anything which might come after, and just enjoy this moment for what it is. And how does Commander Shepard respond to such an earth-shattering revelation, you might wonder? Well, not by fear or confusion or even denial. No, instead, without missing a beat, Shepard tells it, the most advanced and powerful being to have ever existed in the universe, that it's going to fail, and that it's a big dumb machine and machines can be broken. And what can I say? Reapers might be the most advanced and powerful beings to ever exist, but they're not Commander Shepard. From here it's back to business as usual for our esteemed protagonist, which for Shepard means deciding which of your squad mates to save and which to sacrifice, before giving Saren a bit of a slapping and blowing the base on Vermeer sky high. Oh Reapers, you have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into. Next, you return to the Council to warn them of the upcoming complete and entire annihilation of all advanced life in the galaxy. The Council respond by doing what the Council do best, which is putting you under house arrest because they're worried you might cause trouble otherwise, while telling you there's no such thing as the Reapers and that they'll deal with Saren from here on out. You make an escape with the aid of your superior officer, the infinitely more likeable than the Council, Captain Anderson, and then head to a Prothean ruin on the planet Ilos, where you encounter a Prothean virtual intelligence, who explain several key details about the Reapers and how the Protheans fell to them at the end of the last cycle. Here you learn that the Reapers can control minds through indoctrination, which explains Saren's actions, and that the Citadel is actually an enormous mass relay that can be activated to allow the Reapers a path to invade the galaxy. You race back to the Citadel for one last showdown with Saren as the combined Council and Alliance fleets engage the Reaper ship Sovereign. You're given a choice between minimizing human casualties or saving the members of the Council, as well as an opportunity to try to talk Saren down, which will lead to him taking his own life, although he still comes back as a machine organic servant of Sovereign for you to take down in one last boss battle. But take him down you do, and with considerable effort, so too does the combined fleet take down Sovereign, proving that Reapers can be destroyed, even if this is just the end of one of many. It's also the end of the first game, with humanity now granted a seat on the Council for recognition of their actions, and with Shepard vowing to stop the Reapers. On your own though apparently, because whether you save them or not, I guess the Council still aren't really feeling the whole Reaper thing. And that's it for Game 1. So, how does it hold up? Well, Mass Effect 1's story and setting offer some of the best science fiction in gaming, and that's saying a lot, but I didn't find this game had much to offer outside of that. When I first played it, I held its action against it for being a change in direction from what I wanted, but this time I tried not to do that, and still found the action to be rather lacking. The gunplay feels unsatisfying and noticeably outdated, the tactical elements barely exist, and the Mako feels downright unfinished and borderline broken. To some degree it feels like Mass Effect got a free pass on being a bad action game on account of the fact that many who played it simply disliked the alternatives. So, at least in this one particular area, me from 14 years ago was justified in my adverse reaction. But if the action has aged poorly, the cinematic aspects of this game have done anything but. It's remarkable really how well much of this game's presentation holds up, and that's likely a direct result of a large focus placed on these aspects by BioWare. And if Mass Effect failed at being a good action game, it was a resounding success at being a good cinematic game, and the atmosphere and style afforded to it by this is something even I can appreciate. There are other parts of the game too, and they tend to be more mixed. For example, loot is rather basic. Different weapons provide little difference in playstyle, and the way all loot drops are level scaled makes acquiring items rather boring. Still, at least loot actually exists, and the different visual designs for different armors is greatly appreciated. The inventory limit of only 150 items is not though, and just feels unneeded, particularly when you consider how slow it is to clear your inventory out. Character progression could likewise depend on what games you use to compare Mass Effect to. Leveling up is quite basic, but it could be worse. I do have to wonder whether a class system was actually the right choice in the first place though, as there aren't that many weapon types or different abilities, nor are there lore reasons why classes are needed, and an open system with 3 different branching paths, that being combat, biotic and tech, where the player could then pick and choose as they see fit, could provide more player freedom and make the leveling system more interesting. The middle ground classes the game does provide just feel overly restrictive. For example, the Vanguard, the biotic combat hybrid, gets a shotgun, but why does the combat side of this class have to be represented by a shotgun? Why can't I play as a biotic combat hybrid character that uses a sniper rifle, or an assault rifle instead? And how much benefit is there to providing a smaller selection of biotic abilities? Still, I like how Mass Effect 1 has non-combat skills, and enough different skills per character that what to increase requires at least some actual thought. And lastly, there is perhaps the single most praised part of this entire series, the characters. And they're fine. Really, they're exactly what you'd expect given BioWare's previous games. Several characters seem to exist just to give background information on their species, but that doesn't mean they don't also have their own personality. The way you interact with these characters, by confronting them on the Normandy in between missions and then forcing them to tell you their life story, feels a little artificial, and 6 squad mates isn't all that many. Of these 6, only 3 receive any kind of character-specific mission, and of those 3, only Garrus's mission involves meaningful choice and some form of real character development. Really though, Mass Effect 1's characters are okay, but they hardly live up to their substantial reputation. But this is just the first game, and these characters' stories are just getting started. Mass Effect set many of the standards that future RPGs would follow, but it was Mass Effect 2 that would fully embrace this new approach. This was the point where BioWare reached their critical zenith, and where the disconnect between my opinion and everyone else's was at its most extreme. So this should be an interesting game to revisit. And it begins with a bang. The Normandy is under attack. Cutscene transitions into slow cinematic walking sequence and back to more cutscene, all while things explode, gravity is removed, and people die. Lots of them, actually, including you. It takes 7 minutes and 20 seconds for Mass Effect 2 to kill off its main character and destroy its most recognisable icon, the Normandy. Shortly after, both will be brought back to life at the hands of Cerberus, a human-first paramilitary and research group led by the enigmatic Elusive Man. It's this organisation that Shepard will be working with for the rest of the game, but why the writers decided they needed to kill and resurrect Shepard in order to make this happen is something that's always been a mystery to me. I always thought that this would eventually play a vital role in the narrative, but if that was once the intent, it's not something that ever comes to fruition. In interviews, BioWare have stated Mass Effect 2 was meant to be a darker, grittier sequel, the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, hence the focus on Cerberus, but a similar arrangement between them and Shepard could come about through other means, such as if Shepard's persistent desire to ready the galaxy for the Reaper invasion leads to a conflict that results in Shepard losing their status as a Spectre, forcing them to enter in a new dubious alliance, as it's the only option left to do what needs to be done. It could be framed as a more personal story, featuring a new low point for our protagonist, which really tests their morals and beliefs in the face of this impending insurmountable threat. Instead, Mass Effect 2 just blows everything up and then brings in near identical replacements. The role of the Council, as the annoying and ineffective overseers of your mission that you're forced to pretend you answer to, is replaced with the elusive man. Your status as Spectre, who operates above the law, is replaced with Cerberus agent, who just doesn't have to care much about the law, and your crew of hastily assembled misfits ready to stand by your side and save the galaxy is replaced with a mostly new and greatly expanded crew of hastily assembled misfits ready to stand by your side and save the galaxy. The Normandy is also replaced with the new Normandy, which just seems like the original but with extra loading screens. None of these changes are necessarily bad. Well, except for all those loading screens, but mostly these aren't changes for the worst, they're just changes that struggle to justify themselves. What's the point in destroying so much of the original narrative setup, only to replace it with something so similar? At the very least, this presents a missed opportunity to do something more unique, and feels like a step away from one of the important parts of what made the first Mass Effect work, which is that Mass Effect 1 cared about being grounded. It wanted players to believe in its setting, and it had faith that the setting would be interesting enough to then carry the rest of the experience. Mass Effect 2 wants to be cooler, darker, more epic, and it doesn't mind sacrificing some groundedness to do this. But I have to admit, I do like The Empire Strikes Back, and with the knowledge that the Reapers are coming, maybe darker makes sense. So, with Shepard brought back to life, it's time for the usual awkward first day at a new job meet and greet. It's all very relatable stuff. Your boss tries way too hard to impress you, there's some awkward unresolved sexual chemistry between two people in the office, and then one colleague shoots another in the head. Yeah, we've all been there. Here, you'll also get to grips with some of Mass Effect 2's other changes, most notable of which is that aiming is now actually accurate to your reticule. With some added recoil and punchier sound effects, it makes gunplay feel like how it always should have been. Enemy types also feel a bit more varied, with Geth no longer making up the vast majority of encounters, and small details like exploding gas tanks or shooting limbs off mechs really help sell the action experience. The combat arenas you find yourself in do often feel overly small and linear, and there's still a degree of passivity to a combat system that so heavily rewards sitting unmoving behind a single piece of cover and just keeping your head down anytime you take too many hits. You can also find occasional areas of downgrading, like with the smaller impact of several biotic abilities, and I also heavily dislike the decision to make all abilities share a cooldown, removing much of the incentive to vary your ability usage. But overall, it's still a marked improvement over the first game, and considering how much combat there is in this series, it means this is an improvement that provides great value in the long run. Once you've battled your way through the opening tutorial mission and its follow-up, you'll find yourself back in the Normandy, with the galaxy once more at your doorstep. Through the course of this game, you'll continue to work for Cerberus and the Elusive Man to recruit a team of elite specialists, while investigating the appearance of a new intergalactic threat known as the Collectors. The Collectors have been targeting human colonies and abducting their inhabitants, while leaving behind no evidence of their motive, but the Elusive Man suspects Reaper involvement, and as the Collectors are a threat to humanity, and were also the ones who laid a trap for and killed Shepard in the game's opening, it does rather make sense to follow this lead. In the end, Reaper involvement will be confirmed, with the insect-like collectors being revealed to actually be the Protheans, or at least to have once been the Protheans before the Reapers came and turned them into little more than empty, subservient tools. To stop the collectors, Shepard must journey through the Omega-4 relay into a previously uncharted section of the galaxy that no one has ever returned from, in order to destroy the collector base there. To do this, you must assemble a team of the galaxy's best and brightest, plus Jacob, to accompany you on the ultimate suicide mission. Recruiting and gaining the loyalty of these team members forms the bulk of the Mass Effect 2 experience, and it's good. Assembling the ultimate crew for the ultimate mission is an enjoyable trope with a well-proven track record, with examples like Ocean's 11, Armageddon, Seven Samurai, The Avengers, and more, which demonstrates its appeal. And this format tends to work particularly well with narratives that place a strong focus on characters. It also creates a more open structure, as with 12 teammates to recruit, each with their own loyalty mission that unlocks after some time together, you're often free to pursue your objectives in the order you choose. To this end, the galaxy map makes a return, but the Mako and planetary exploration don't. In their place is a new scanning minigame, where you search the surface of planets from afar to extract 4 different resources. These resources are used for upgrading weapons, armour, the Normandy, and Shepard themselves, and some of these upgrades are even taken into consideration in the game's final mission, where failure to upgrade them can lead to characters dying and not showing up in the next game. So, these resources are of the utmost importance, and to get anywhere near the amount you'll need of them, you'll have to spend a long time with this particular minigame. And it's boring, and eventually ends up being more tedious than even the Mako's worst moments. The planetary descriptions that were once so effective at capturing my imagination with nothing but text and statistics return, but now they feel entirely pointless as your limited interaction with these planets means they no longer feel like real places. Instead, they just seem like resource containers, with the only difference between them being the total yield they offer. So why bother with learning about their background? The Mako may have been bad, but it had soul. Landing on planets was exciting, in theory, and there was clear potential with so many different directions that they could have went with this idea. But instead, the entire system was just scrapped and replaced with something that the developers must have known isn't very interesting. I mean, it's difficult to see where theoretical enjoyment was even supposed to come from with scanning, but it's not janky, no one will rage at faulty aiming, and it's not resource intensive to implement, which I guess for BioWare meant that the change was worth it. The thing is, this isn't the only time Mass Effect 2 throws the baby out with the bathwater. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Mass Effect 2 positively hates babies. So, limited space in the inventory system, leading to tedium when selling or deconstructing unneeded items. Not a problem, just remove the entire inventory system. Players can't run out of space with something that doesn't even exist. Leveling up too complicated for people too lazy to read a simple menu? Not to worry, we don't need 11 skills, let's just have a maximum of 6 for Shepard and 4 for everyone else. Good luck getting confused now. Pausing combat to issue tactical commands seems ineffective and slow. Well, just allow players to assign squad members' abilities to their hotbars and use them mid-combat, like all their other abilities, so there's no need to ever pause the game. Other times, changes just seem to focus on streamlining for the sake of streamlining. Different armor types? Don't need them, just add a second skin for characters. Non-combat skills that affect how you open containers and gather information? Too old school, no one likes the old, they're almost as bad as babies. Experience points coming from a range of different activities. Too unpredictable, just have all experience points come from the mission completion. Quests with different ways to achieve your objective and non-linear level design. Too much effort to implement. Just stick to corridors. The critical response to this was almost universally positive. Streamlining was praised as the future, and it worked with the first game, so why not go further? The thing is, Mass Effect 1 streamlined several parts of its RPG design to deliver a more cinematic and action-focused experience. Mass Effect 2 streamlines many parts of its RPG design and adds nothing. Some problems are fixed through this, but that doesn't seem worthy of praise. It's like if someone walks up to you and tells you they have a serious problem, they're unhappy, and then you respond by taking a gun and putting a bullet through their brain, and hey, problem solved, they're not unhappy anymore. In fact, they'll never be unhappy again. The problem is as solved as it is possible to be, but they're also fucking dead. You shouldn't get a gold star in this situation for your genius problem solving, you should get a psychiatric evaluation and probably a prison sentence. In short, killing babies, bad. RPG stuff, good. Killing unhappy people, controversial. And I miss the Mako. Not enough for me to go back to earlier in my script and defend it more vigorously, but enough for me to consider it. Still, there are things Mass Effect 2 does well. For starters, the environments are much improved. The first game got much of its atmosphere from empty alien planets and exploring space, and the more ambient soundtrack and cleaner aesthetic reflected that. Mass Effect 2 instead focuses more on urban environments that are darker, denser, and dirtier, and this change is mirrored in the music and visual style. And some of the new locations look fantastic. I'm sure many people remember the first time they walked into the Afterlife Club on Omega, and you only need to compare it to Chora's Den in the first game to see how far the sequel has come in this regard. There are design choices in Mass Effect 2 that take away from the immersion, stuff like achievement progress pop-ups, mission end screens, and the unnecessary and uninteresting mini-games for hacking and decryption. But for the most part, atmosphere in this game is as strong as ever, which helps pull players into the story. And as for that story, the episodic structure employed here excels at expanding the lore and characters, and there are plenty of episodes to get through. You now have 8 recruitment missions, 12 loyalty missions, and a few extra main story excursions, and each of these can be thought of as their own standalone chapter, usually complete with their own standalone narratives. To compare this game to its predecessor, Mass Effect 2 is basically 26 episodes long, whereas Mass Effect 1 was 8 episodes long, and while the linearity of Mass Effect 2's episodes can negatively impact gameplay, the quality of their narratives remains largely untouched. Of course, not every one of these 26 episodes can excel, but there are plenty that do, particularly when they're able to combine lore and character development with episodic storytelling. For example, when you recruit the genetically engineered Krogan, Grunt, the player is dropped into the middle of a conflict between newborn Krogan and mercenaries. The reason for this conflict is left as a mystery, and in the process of uncovering its answer, the lore surrounding the genophage is expanded upon, and Grunt is effectively introduced as a character that has more depth than just being a powerful fighter. Recruiting Asari Justicar Samara is another good example, with moral choices, strong narrative tension between Samara and the detective, and the introduction of the intriguing and alien concept of the Justicars. Other missions focus more on character development than lore. Recruiting Garrus is made meaningful by your past relationship with him, and in witnessing what has happened to his character since your previous time spent together. And the reveal that this legendary vigilante you've been tracking is actually your old friend makes for a strong narrative moment. The loyalty missions also regularly shine. Even the worst tend to feature above average stories and provide some much needed development to your squad mates, and the best provide some of the most memorable moments of the series. Tally's loyalty mission, where you accompany her to the migrant fleet after she's accused of treason, provides the player with their first real glimpse inside the Quarian nomadic way of life, while making Tally more sympathetic and involving a morally grey, multi-part choice in how best to interact with the Quarian admirals investigating her, where you're asked to balance what you believe to be right with what Tally wants in regard to her father's legacy. The final scene where Shepard can stand up for Tally to convince the admirals of her innocence perfectly displays the strong bond between these two characters. It feels good to stand up for a friend, but more than that, this mission truly makes Tally and Shepard feel like friends. Some character development that happens through these loyalty missions can feel slightly too forced, and their short durations and limited outcomes can hamper their effectiveness, but their inclusion still greatly benefits the cast of characters who, in this game, finally start to live up to their reputation as some of the best in gaming. There's a problem in many RPGs where party members feel like they're designed around their backstory. The writers basically conjure up the greatest backstory they can think of, and then your interactions with these party members involve speaking to them in between important story events to uncover that backstory. What feels so impressive about the Mass Effect games is that so many party members' stories feel like they're being written over the course of the trilogy. Take Garrus, who is possibly the most popular character in the entire series. In the first game, he's a Citadel security officer who is conflicted over whether rules and regulations help or hinder attempts to make the world a better place. And really, that's it. I mean, his personality seems likeable enough, he comes across as competent at least, and his character design is pretty cool, even if that's more of a Turian thing than a Garrus-specific thing. Really though, there's nothing unique, original, or deep about him. In Mass Effect 1. Between games, we learn he follows his aversion for rules to its logical extreme, becoming a greatly feared and respected vigilante in the deadly gang-filled slums of Omega. You could even say he's trying to follow in the footsteps of the person he most respected, Shepard, by fighting for good in his own way, just as he saw you do, which makes his situation feel more personal to the player, particularly when you learn of the demise of his new team and how close he comes to defeat himself until your timely intervention. And then when you do meet in Mass Effect 2, your previous history makes it feel like being reunited with an old friend, which at this point in the game is something that's in short supply. His loyalty mission then provides a chance to see him grow as a person by giving up on revenge to instead do the right thing. And then finally, as he is one of only 2 characters who are with you in every game in the series, it means you're able to really get a sense of how much he and Shepard have actually been through together, during which he never once lets you down, never complains, and never undermines your authority. He is stoic, enduring, and loyal, always. But most of all, he's a true friend, always there for you when you need him, willing to journey with you into the depths of hell and back, and is more than happy to do so again, and again, and again, as many times as it takes. In Mass Effect 1, there is nothing interesting about Garrus, but there will be, and the player will be there to witness that story develop almost every step of the way. I don't think the Mass Effect trilogy contains the best written characters in gaming, but it does make the time spent with these characters carry great meaning, and while this isn't particularly apparent in the first game, it is by the second. I also think BioWare deserve credit for the quality of the dialogue in these games, which manages to come across as both believable and engaging. So, characters are important to this series, and the recurrent nature of this cast is what allows them to really excel. I do think this series has a bit of a problem with the way in which you often run into people though. This is one of those things that started to be a problem for me, but maybe isn't a problem for anyone else, and yet I still want to talk about it because this video is secretly all about me. Anyway, galaxies are pretty big, right? Lots of planets, lots of stars, lots of people. They certainly sound rather large. So why do you constantly run into people you know everywhere you go in these games? The very first planet you go to in Mass Effect 2 is a remote human colony, recently hit by the Collectors, and it just so happens that Tali turns up here at exactly the same time because she just so happened to be investigating a missing Quarian who just so happened to be there on their pilgrimage. That's a pretty big coincidence, surely, but you're also going to stumble into every single other party member from the first game. Well, except for the one you left to die on Vermeer. Resurrection's a Shepard-only thing, I'm afraid. But it's not just party members, you also meet every single other important or semi-important person you interacted with throughout the first game's story. Remember that Asari researcher on Vermeer? What about the undercover secretary on Novaria? How about the mind-controlled green Asari on Feros? Well, they're here. Everyone is here for some reason. It would be one thing if Shepard was the one going looking for them, and for some people he might have reason to do this, but that's almost never what happens. Throughout both the second and third game, you just can't stop running into old friends, enemies, acquaintances, people you made eye contact with once for a few seconds too long. It feels like everyone turns up. The first game isn't exempt from this problem either. In Mass Effect 1, you could only access a small area in the Citadel with relatively few NPCs, and yet at the start of the game, as soon as I jumped into a random system and headed down onto some unknown planet's surface, I found an item that needs to be returned to one of those few NPCs on the Citadel, and then, as soon as I went to a second planet, it happened again. There are so many planets in the galaxy, and each planet has such a big landmass, and yet the exact locations I went to apparently just so happened to have something belonging to one of the few people I had seen back on the Citadel. And this happened twice. Individual examples of this can come across as contrived, but the overall impact, even for players who don't stop to think about how statistically unlikely these individual occurrences must be, is that the galaxy is made to feel very small, as if it's some tiny town out in the countryside where everyone knows each other and you can't go to coffee without seeing at least 8 people you know. But it's an entire galaxy. Small is the last way it should feel, and it's as if the writers never even considered this. I guess fictional stories are almost by definition contrived, but I still think many of these examples could have been avoided if the writers had simply tried, and that this would have benefited the narrative. And as for that narrative, with the Avengers assembled and their loyalty possibly acquired, and with the Normandy hopefully upgraded, and with a few story missions relating to acquiring the necessary technology needed to jump through the Omega-4 relay completed, through which you discover the true nature of the Collectors, as remnants of the Protheans, and recruit a sentient non-hostile Geth named Legion, who reveals the Geth really aren't so bad. Most of the time, it's just their synthetic nature has allowed them to fall under control of the Reapers. With all that done, it's time to head through the relay to destroy the Collector base. But before you can do this, the Collectors board the Normandy while Shepard and the gang are away on a mission, and capture all of its crew. Except for the one person you actually need, your trusty pilot Joker, which really raises the stakes before the big finale. This scene plays out as another cinematic walking sequence where, for some reason, you control Joker. This is the only point in the entire trilogy where you control a character other than Shepard, and it's hard to understand why. By 2010 standards, maybe the aliens moving around in the background were meant to be impressive, but by modern standards they really aren't, and this scene feels like it could have been just as effective as a simple cutscene, while being much easier to implement and maintaining the consistency of always controlling Shepard. Still, this is a minor grievance, and what follows, the long-awaited suicide mission which the entire game has been building up to, more than makes up for any problems that immediately precede it. It's easy to be critical of various aspects of how this mission is handled, but to do so risks failing to appreciate how ambitious the end sequence of this game really was. During this mission, it's possible for everyone, even Commander Shepard, to die, while still successfully completing the game. A lot of games are able to implement narrative choice in a way that makes players feel like they are making big decisions, but it's really creating consequences for those decisions that is the hard part. As far as consequences go, killing team members is rather crude, but that doesn't mean it's not effective. The main factor which determines whether your teammates live or die is whether you've completed their loyalty missions, but the game also takes into consideration how much you've upgraded the Normandy and who you choose for key roles during the mission itself. It may have been better if your choices made during the mission carried more weight, as the way it actually works is that completionists are heavily rewarded regardless of the choices they make, leaving important decisions made in the moment feeling rather secondary, but the amount of variables taken into consideration and the tension that character deaths can create make this one of the most exciting parts of the trilogy. The action in this mission does its best to keep up with the big occasion, the soundtrack soars, and epic speeches are delivered. It's just the actual landing which Mass Effect 2 fails to stick. As you move deeper into the Collector base in order to blow it to pieces from the inside, you eventually come to a huge half-built robotic human, which you're told is a Reaper to be. This is why the collectors collect, to harvest humans to bake into a great big human robot Reaper cake. It looks rather dumb though, and while I'm sure this was meant to be shocking, it just comes across as a little silly. There's no reason why Reapers should need to be built in the shape of one of the species they conquer, and it makes for a rather shaky conclusion to the actual story. In the first game, you discover the Reapers are coming, and deal a decisive blow to their efforts by slowing their invasion. In the third game, the Reapers come. In Mass Effect 2, however, the Reapers just seem to be messing around, toying with their food and playing Lego, while everyone waits for the real invasion to get underway. It's like a filler chapter where Shepard saves the day once more before getting back to the real story in the next game. If this was actually meant to be the darker, grittier, more personal Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, I can't help but wonder why the Empire never struck back, i.e., why this game wasn't about trying and subsequently failing to stop the Reaper invasion that the final game would focus on. Still, even if the destination is weak, the journey's strong, and I think, 11 years later, I can finally say I honestly enjoyed this game a lot. As an RPG, Mass Effect 2 regularly disappoints, but as a game, it usually doesn't. It is a more mixed bag than its initial critical reception suggests, but this adventure still offers plenty to appreciate. The improvements to gameplay have a big impact on the end result, and the density of high-quality missions provide plenty of opportunities for this game to delve into what the series does best, with strong character moments, expanded lore, weighty choices, and an ever-present sense of style and atmosphere. Still, for all of Mass Effect 2's strengths, problems are clearly brewing in the Mass Effect universe, and not just for its inhabitants. If Mass Effect 1 and 2 both made large strides towards a more cinematic approach to RPGs, then Mass Effect 3 is more of a refinement of the second game. Still, refining isn't necessarily bad, and in this case, it led to the best gameplay in the series. While Mass Effect 2 improved the feel of its combat to be more in line with the standards of other third-person shooters of the time, it was still left with combat encounters that involved too much time spent hiding behind cover, and which could feel overly repetitive. Mass Effect 3 addresses this in a number of ways. Firstly, it greatly increases enemy variety, with 3 different types of enemies, Geth, Reaper units, and Cerberus mercenaries, each with their own expanded variety of enemy units that shake things up in terms of level of survivability, movement speed, and range of effectiveness. Added enemy attacks like grenades and smoke clouds, improved enemy AI that is more willing to be the aggressor and flank the player, and new enemy types like the shielded Cerberus troops or the devastating Reaper Banshees mean that hiding behind a single piece of cover for an entire firefight is a thing of the past. Now you have to move or die, and with the addition of a combat role and better sprint, it creates a new focus on mobility that makes for more dynamic and intense combat. The environments you'll find yourself fighting through are also more varied, with a greater emphasis on open spaces and verticality, which is a clear improvement from the second game's more restrictive and linear design. You also no longer have regenerating health, which adds more consequence to being hit, and there's a combo system based on Shepard's and party members' abilities to add a little bit of squad synergy, and in a long overdue change, you are now free to use all weapon types regardless of class, adding more player choice and variety in combat. This is complemented by the return of weapon mods, a much greater variety of weapon types, and a new weight system that increases ability cooldown based on how many weapons you take into battle, to force players to think carefully about their loadout. There are still areas that can be criticised, like the frequent use of forgettable turret sections, but despite this, it's still easily the best combat in the trilogy, and character progression has also seen several improvements, with Shepard now having up to 9 skills to choose between on level ups, with each one having more branching options, providing a far greater sense of customization. Outside of gameplay, Mass Effect 3 does sometimes continue the series' tradition of streamlining, with the strangest and most painful example being the removal of the middle dialogue option. In the Mass Effect wheel, the middle option was meant to be the neutral response. Maybe neutrality seemed unimportant to BioWare, but the middle option was more than a generic middle ground. It was the professional option, the pragmatic option, the I'm here for business, not pleasure option, and the I haven't quite made my mind up about you yet, and I feel it would be inappropriate to be overly rude or friendly at this stage of our relationship option. If video games were real, my life would be all about the middle option, and maybe I'm taking this removal rather personally, but lines have to be drawn somewhere, and this time you went too far, BioWare. I can just imagine the meeting where this decision was made. I bet someone pulled the data on all dialogue choices and found the middle options were chosen only 10% of the time or something, and then someone else had the bright idea about just removing it to save time on writing. And God, just the thought of this hypothetical meeting makes my blood boil. Sometimes the options we don't pick are just as important as those we do, and it's only through having the option to not pick something that what we do pick is given meaning. This is particularly true in this example, as the use of the Paragon-Renegade dynamic heavily encourages consistency in your choices. And so, when playing Paragon, I found myself basically ignoring the bottom option as hostile responses just didn't feel like they fit my character. This meant the choice I was actually making was between the top and middle option, and I had the same kind of inverse experience when playing Renegade. Therefore, to remove the middle option feels close to removing dialogue choices altogether, and I think the importance of this particular piece of streamlining ended up often overlooked as a result of how most discussions surrounding this game, good, bad, or ugly, ended up focusing on the story. So let's move on to that. Even how it starts feels controversial. BioWare, perhaps feeling the need to outdo the previous game's opening in terms of spectacle, jumps straight into a large-scale Reaper invasion of Earth, with the important questions relating to the last game's ending, like what's Shepard been up to, where are your crew, why are you answering to the Alliance again, and what happened to Cerberus, getting brushed aside to make room for the action. I mean, you're literally speaking to an Alliance council about the state of the galaxy when a big old Reaper laser beam blasts through the ceiling and interrupts you. In the first 6 minutes of the actual game, Shepard almost gets hit by an explosion 4 times. That's a 1 near-miss explosion per 1.5 minutes of game time ratio, and that's quite the ratio. I don't want to argue that flashy explosions are inherently bad, but surely this kind of thing has to have some kind of diminishing returns at some point. If it's not obvious yet, I'm not a big fan of what BioWare were going for with this opening sequence. The attempts at emotional resonance from the death of a child who's shown multiple times end up falling flat, and the spectacle that is achieved just doesn't make up for how jarring the abruptness of this reintroduction to the story is, even if the action and explosions do manage to successfully set the tone for the rest of this frequently bombastic main story. But it's not just tone that feels different this time around. Mass Effect 3 uses a more direct structure for the bulk of its narrative content that moves away from the shorter, standalone episodic approach of the last 2 games to instead feature a smaller number of distinct chapters, which lead directly on from one another and maintain a constant focus on the Reaper invasion. Considering the importance of the Reaper invasion, this approach was probably necessary, but it does mean that this game is no longer about travelling the galaxy and solving a variety of different sci-fi mysteries, which means it's no longer able to freely explore the lore and setting in the same way as the last games. And with this different approach to storytelling, some of the sense of exploration found within those previous games gets lost. Now, planets just exist to be backdrops for the Reaper War. New lore gets introduced more rarely, and the few new characters that do make an appearance often struggle to form a lasting impression. And then there's the side content. Excluding that which is centered around returning characters, all other side quests involve either short combat encounters that are reusing multiplayer maps, or handing in random items to NPCs on the Citadel, where you just pick something up on your travels, then run up to the right NPC at a later date, press one button, and quest complete. Really, Mass Effect 3 seems to have little interest in anything outside of the Reaper invasion, and that means there's a lot of pressure to do that invasion well, because not only is this the last installment in a much-hyped trilogy, but also there's just not much else interesting going on in the narrative. The real problem then might be that not everything about this invasion is done well. Once Shepard has escaped Earth, you head to Mars to investigate a Prothean research facility where you find your former teammate Liara, who tells you she's discovered information about a Prothean superweapon called the Crucible that's capable of destroying all the Reapers and saving the galaxy. Making this discovery only a few minutes after Reapers invade feels far too convenient for something so important. You basically go from, "Oh no, the galaxy's doomed, there's nothing we can do," to, "Yay, the galaxy's saved, just have to get everyone to work together and wait around for a bit." All by just making it out of the tutorial section and bumping into an old friend. It's weak storytelling, and an event of such importance can't just come out of nowhere. Really, the Crucible is such a big deal, but if this was how the writers wanted to resolve the Reaper threat, they should have probably dedicated an entire game just to finding this solution. If only there was a middle part of this trilogy where nothing much happens in the main story that could have been used. Alas, life is rarely so perfect. Anyway, after bumping into the perfect solution for stopping the Reapers, you head to the Council to find they're still as useless as ever, and then you set about uniting the galaxy yourself, while the Alliance forces race against time to try to build the Crucible before they get wiped out by the apparently quite slow-moving Reaper invasion. And here we come to another problem I have with this narrative. Meeting Sovereign in Mass Effect 1 is, in my eyes, the single best moment in the entire trilogy. The main reason for this was because it made the Reapers seem genuinely intimidating. They were something beyond a normal type of enemy that with enough manpower and tech could just be defeated in battle. They were cosmic horror, unknowable, uncaring, and unstoppable. But in Mass Effect 3, they're not. They're something much lesser, and while it's understandable that BioWare wanted a big finale with lots of fighting, it's a shame that the best qualities of the Reapers had to be sacrificed to achieve this. And even if there had to be a big showdown with all the Reapers to meet BioWare's necessary epic quota, I still think the actual invasion could have been executed better. For example, the attack on Earth comes off as rather amateur, and even though this happens at the very start of the game, Earth is still standing, just about, by the game's ending. I mean, come on Reapers, learn to reap, you scrubs. You also defeat individual Reapers yourself, multiple times, sometimes on foot where you dodge their slow-moving laser beams or avoid their clumsy feet, and it just makes them seem rather pathetic. And then there are aspects that feel overly gamey, like how there's a minigame where you run away from Reaper pursuers on the galaxy map. A minigame that continues the Mass Effect tradition of feeling unnecessary, but this time also feels a bit silly, particularly as there's zero consequence to being caught, as you just load back into the same map right away. Ultimately, I like the idea of the Reapers more than the actual Reapers, and I think the idea behind them didn't quite get the respect it deserved when it comes to the writing in this game. And they're not the only weak antagonist. Cerberus also make a return, but not as the mysterious and morally grey group from the last game. Now they've morphed into a cartoonish depiction of evil, with soldiers that have been genetically modified into something more monster than man, and with the elusive man's motivation changing from being about saving humanity no matter the cost, to instead now be about trying to control the Reapers using their own technology, which is the type of diabolical master plan that only a true villain could ever think would actually work. It's eventually revealed that the elusive man is under Reaper indoctrination, which explains his actions over the course of the story, but it doesn't remedy how boring Cerberus are in this game. In Mass Effect 2, the question of can you trust this group was at the heart of the narrative, and it wasn't an easy question to answer, as while many characters warn you against siding with Cerberus, others, like Miranda, show an extreme amount of loyalty and belief in their cause. And while many actions of Cerberus were always morally questionable, it could be argued that the circumstances you found yourself in require extreme actions, and unlike other important groups like the Council, at least Cerberus believed in the Reaper threat and were willing to do something about it. But all the things that made Cerberus interesting, their moral greyness, their opposition to the Reapers, and the unanswered question over whether you can trust them, are now gone to make way for a new enemy type that can show up anytime Reaper troops might not be in the area. Also, Cerberus are responsible for the teleporting, sword-wielding, nothing personal kid, Kai Leng, who feels at odds with the once grounded approach to science fiction, and instead seems more like a character that has wandered out of some shonen anime, and not a particularly good one. When it comes to Cerberus and the Reapers, it's the previous games that have created the problems. I probably wouldn't have been disappointed in the Reapers if the first game didn't make me expect something better, and I wouldn't have cared about the change to Cerberus if it didn't feel like it went against their depiction in the second game. In these examples, Mass Effect 3 struggles to live up to its legacy, but that's not always the case. As Shepard sets about uniting the galaxy, they're pulled into the game of galactic politics. So, to gain the support of Viturians, you need to secure help in the defense of their homeworld, and there's only one race in the galaxy that's big enough and bad enough to get the job done. But the Krogans will only offer their assistance in return for a cure to the genophage. So you meet up with a team of top-secret Solarian scientists to secure the cure, before heading to the Krogan homeworld of Tuchanka to put that cure into action. But before you get there, you're contacted by the Solarian leader, who asks you to sabotage the cure so that the Krogan will only think the genophage is cured. What follows is another highly cinematic action set-piece that culminates in your decision over the fate of the Krogan. Unlike the invasion of Earth, however, this time the more gradual build-up and greater player involvement makes the epicness feel earned, and the final decision is one of the strongest in the entire series. This isn't a question of right and wrong, or Paragon and Renegade. It's a complicated and multifaceted issue that asks you to carefully consider the possible future ramifications, and will likely involve several former teammates by way of the Krogan leader Rex and Solarian scientist Mordin. Other factors can influence it too, such as whether you destroy the rogue Solarian's research in Mass Effect 2, and whether you tell certain characters the truth, and some of the ways the finale of this story can play out can be surprisingly emotional for a game that started with 4 explosions in 6 minutes. The next chapter of this story is very similar. This time it's the Quarian and Geth plotline that gets its long-awaited resolution as you fight to end the war between the two groups, while journeying to the former Quarian homeworld of Rannoch and learning the truth behind the Geth's creation. This culminates in Shepard trying to free the Geth of Reaper control, which results in a choice between allowing the Quarian fleet to destroy the Geth, leading to their extinction, or to allow your former Geth teammate Legion to upload Reaper code to the Geth Collective, allowing the entirety of the Geth to achieve true intelligence, making them free from Reaper control but also much more dangerous. Just as before, the correct solution to this situation is not obvious, and either choice will likely result in the death of a friend, and possibly more than one. Throughout this entire trilogy, the player is asked to make difficult moral choices, and this is often when the narrative is strongest. The first game asked players whether to save or kill the Rachni on Navaria, which squad member to sacrifice on Vermeer, and whether to save the Council or prioritise human life during the ending, and Mass Effect 2 had frequent choices in character loyalty missions, as well as whether to destroy or salvage the Collector base. There are lots of effective and impactful moments of choice in this series, but deciding the fate of the Krogan and the Geth are likely the very best. Not because of the inherent complexity of the choices themselves, but because they act as the culmination of 2 integral narrative threads that have been interwoven with the main story since the series began. The Genophage and the Geth are like seeds that were planted in the first game and were then nurtured through the rest of the series, only for Mass Effect 3 to come along and decide that now is the time for the harvest. And it's here, in these two choices, that Mass Effect truly feels like it succeeds as a trilogy, as something that is far greater than the sum of its parts and wouldn't be possible without its longer duration. It's a shame then that not every major choice in this game is this well executed. After enlisting some combination of Turians, Solarians, Quarians, Krogan and Geth, and foiling a Cerberus assassination attempt on the Council back at the Citadel, the focus returns to the completion of the Crucible, which is revealed to require some final component referred to as the Catalyst. This leads you to the Asari homeworld of Thessia, and the Cerberus base and former residence of the Elusive Man, as you track down a Prothean virtual intelligence who explains how the Crucible is not Prothean technology, but rather something that preceded the Protheans, and that the catalyst needed to complete the Crucible is, in fact, the Citadel itself, which has since been captured by the Reapers. What follows is an all-out attack against the Reapers as the joint forces the player has assembled and the Human Alliance attempt to reclaim Earth and activate the Crucible by joining it with the Citadel. By this point, fighting your way through Reaper forces might be wearing out its welcome, but the ruinous skeletal remains of Earth at least provide a foreboding sense of atmosphere, and the final conversations with each party member are surprisingly heartfelt. There's a clear sense of how much these characters have been through together, and how uncertain their future really is. It makes for a fitting goodbye. You then fight your way to the Reaper transportation beam that leads to the Citadel, with Shepard being the only one to actually make it. On the Citadel, you meet long-standing friend, Admiral Anderson, alongside the Elusive Man, who makes one last-ditch effort to convince you of the virtues of controlling the Reapers, and somehow forces you to shoot Anderson. Still, while Shepard's resolve might be bruised, it's not broken. You kill the Elusive Man, activate the Crucible, and step foot into what may well be the most controversial ending to a video game in history. It's a strange thing to look back on, the ending of Mass Effect 3. In the time since, gaming controversies have become a thing, and now they come and go like the rain, intersecting with our modern political discourse to stoke the fires of rage in people all over the internet over a wide range of different things, but it wasn't always like that. In early 2012, YouTube was still relatively small, and the influencers of the online world hadn't yet learnt to successfully monetize every minor outrage they sensed coming their way. The great internet culture war was also only just starting to find its footing, and established game developers with proven track records weren't seen as disasters waiting to happen, but rather as genuine good guys who could do no wrong in the eyes of their largely infatuated audience. The controversy surrounding this ending was like a changing point for all of that, and it's probably not an exaggeration to say that it was a historically significant moment for gaming culture. But fuck the controversy, and fuck gaming culture. That's not what this video is about. This video is about me. I mean, Mass Effect. Me is what I like to call it. It's a acronym. But really, I didn't wait 9 years to make this video only to have to pretend like I care about the opinion of people who aren't me. So, after Shepard activates the Crucible, you ascend to a new part of the Citadel where you meet the Catalyst, who appears in the ethereal form of a child that looks a lot like the one Shepard saw die on Earth during the opening. In the original ending, the Catalyst says he controls the Reapers, and that they are a necessary solution to chaos. He explains that without the Reapers, synthetic life would eventually destroy all organic life, and that this is an inevitability that the Reapers' cycle of harvesting advanced civilizations prevents. However, as an organic life has now made it to the Catalyst for the first time, this is apparently proof that the cycle no longer works, and so the Catalyst says it's up to Shepard what to do about all this. Your options are to destroy all synthetic life, including Reapers, Geth, and one of your companions, Edie, which the child says will only lead to future conflict when synthetics are one day rebuilt. Or you can try to control the Reapers, which will end the cycle, but it will also destroy the mass relays and cost Shepard their life. Or finally, with a high war score, you can choose to synthesize all organic life with synthetic life, combining both to create a new form of evolution, once more at the cost of Shepard's life. And with that explanation, the dramatic music kicks in, and the player must make their decision. Whichever you choose, the ending cutscene is much the same, showing the Crucible activating and the Reaper invasion ending while the Normandy flees, only to be seen at the very end with at least some of its former crew still alive, and with Shepard only surviving if you choose Destroy and have a high enough war score. I've tried to make my explanation of this scene as accurate as possible, and while I have shortened it slightly, I've still tried to preserve its meaning. If my explanation doesn't seem like it explains enough, well, that was how the original ending was, and that was a big part of the problem. A later free DLC expanded the ending slightly, allowing you to ask more questions while tweaking and extending the end cutscenes, and providing one new choice in the form of not choosing one of the previous options, which would allow the Reapers to complete the harvest and begin a new cycle. The extended ending is better, but it still fails to explain many of the details which matter the most. The first of which is that the Catalyst's entire argument is centered on the idea that synthetic and organic life cannot coexist, but it doesn't explain why. Over the course of this game, we see the exact opposite. Edie is an advanced AI who is a valuable party member, a friend to Shepard, and possibly romantically involved with Joker. She is coexisting perfectly and comes across as smart, kind, funny, honest, observant, self-aware, loyal, charming, please marry me Edie, I want to have your robot babies, empathetic, trustworthy, open-minded, and I could go on. I mean, seriously, she is literally perfect. Legion, your former companion, also seems like a stand-up guy, although he's not as well endowed and I would not have sex with him. And then the Quarian and Geth storyline that has been so important to this series often ends up being all about finding a way for both to coexist, and through this storyline we see that the only reason the conflict even began was that when the Geth first became sentient, the Quarians responded with genocide, and genocide is often considered rather low on the tier list of ways to say hello. So, organics and synthetics can totally coexist. At least that's how the game makes it seem, and the onus is on the Catalyst to prove otherwise, which it doesn't. At all. Really, the Catalyst needed to explain their reasoning, preferably by drawing on examples from the original cycle, as this would also provide a more satisfying explanation of where the Reapers came from. The danger presented by advanced AIs could work as a justification for this story. Perhaps once synthetic life becomes self-aware, it will then inevitably continue to grow in intelligence until it always reaches a point where organic life is considered dangerous and must be eliminated. Maybe the Catalyst could even point to Edie's growth over the course of the game as an example of how AIs become more intelligent when they're capable of thinking for themselves. This isn't a particularly original concept. Ever-advancing AIs show up all the time in sci-fi, but that doesn't matter. This part of the story doesn't need to be original, as there is enough originality already. It just needs to make the rest of the story work, and fear of AIs is an easy thing to believe in. In our current day and age, many people are worried about the future of AIs, and have you ever asked an Alexa to do something, anything, for you, and witnessed firsthand just how outrageously incompetent our current AIs are? And yet that's enough to make people scared, which proves this fear has clear potential, but it's a potential Mass Effect doesn't try to actually utilize in any way outside of one matter-of-fact statement from the Catalyst. The next problem is with the choices themselves. The Crucible was designed to stop the Reapers, So why can it allow these other functions? And why does shooting some tank kill all synthetic life? Surely that's not how some ultra-advanced superweapon was designed, to be turned on by shooting this bit here. And why does grabbing these rods allow you to control the Reapers? I mean, it also apparently kills you, so are you controlling the Reapers from the afterlife or what? How does that work? And what does control even mean? Will they be like your personal army, or can you just give a one-off command before being vaporized? And why does jumping into the glowing light cause organic and synthetic life to combine? How does that work? And why would this be connected to the player's war score? Was the Crucible originally designed to care about how many ships its user has in their fleet, and then give them a cool new option if their army was big enough? If so, why? Nothing here seems to make sense. Not everything needs to be explained, but the disconnect between these actions and their consequences, and the brief and unclear explanation from the catalyst, just make this choice feel unnecessarily confusing. When I first reached this part all those years ago, I had no idea what to choose because I didn't understand the choices I'd been given, and seeing each ending did nothing to alleviate that confusion. The biggest difference between them is just the colour of the light released, which is hardly illuminating. And lastly, even if you accept the catalyst's non-explanation and understand each choice and aren't concerned about how they work, you still don't have much reason to care about this choice. Every outcome can potentially be very bad in its own way. Control might not actually stop the Reapers, destroy kills innocent synthetic life, and synthesize violates the autonomy of every being in the galaxy. And we have no way to determine which outcome might be better than another. It's just vague, bad possibilities, so why would I even care about which I choose? This was my experience with this choice on this second playthrough. It just doesn't feel like the player is given enough information about this choice to be able to make it. There's a popular fan theory surrounding this final scene that suggests Shepard is being indoctrinated by the Reapers, just like Saren or the Elusive Man were before him. In this theory, the child is a vision from the Reapers that is trying to manipulate Shepard to prevent him from destroying them. Shepard has spent enough time around the Reapers to possibly start being indoctrinated, and the fact that the Catalyst has the same appearance as the child from the game's opening, who you also happen to see in these recurrent and rather uninteresting dream sequences, supports this idea that Shepard has been slowly becoming more indoctrinated over the course of the game. Indoctrination theory also cleverly incorporates any part of the ending that doesn't seem to make sense as evidence of Shepard's indoctrination, which is rather convenient. And there's further evidence to support this in some of the strange events during the ending, like Shepard shooting Anderson. There are problems with indoctrination theory, however, like why would the child explain how to destroy the Reapers if this was the exact thing it's trying to prevent? And this theory has also been casually disavowed by BioWare themselves more than once. However, even if indoctrination theory wasn't meant to be some super secret canon ending designed to act as one last twist in the road for fans to cleverly piece together post-release, that doesn't mean it's not an interesting interpretation, or that BioWare deserves zero credit for it. To me, it seems like the ending of this game was deliberately designed to be vague, so as to allow for multiple interpretations. And in the end, this vagueness actually ends up doing a lot of damage, but the way it provides room for this kind of creative fan theory might be one of the few positives about this overly unclear approach. Still, this is by no means enough to salvage this ending. Mass Effect 3's ending is bad. It's a hugely disappointing conclusion to what is otherwise a deeply meaningful journey, and the bad taste it left in many players' mouths is understandable. How much a weak ending hurts the rest of the experience is something each person has to answer for themselves. For me, it doesn't ruin the good parts of the trilogy, it doesn't even come close, but I was never as in love with this series as others, so maybe I was just able to avoid the heartbreak this ending caused in others as a result. I do not, however, think this is the worst ending in gaming, and in retrospect, the controversy does seem rather over the top. I do think that there was a genuine attempt to create an interesting choice here. It was just implemented very poorly. And also that this ending does at least have artistic integrity. If the developers simply wanted to be lazy, they could have ended the game with Shepard and Anderson sitting together after killing the elusive man, as the Crucible activates killing all Reapers. Maybe the fates of Shepard and Anderson could be connected to your war score and the choices made in that final conversation with the elusive man, so that BioWare could at least pretend that there was an important choice involved and that your actions in the game had mattered, and then the game could have ended with a slideshow summing up the player's major decisions and one final scene showing all the still living important characters together, just to leave things on a positive note before the credits roll. And this ending would have been fine. It would be neither good nor bad, while requiring less effort to implement and having almost no chance of a major backlash. But the creative minds in charge weren't satisfied with an ending that was fine. They wanted to create something good. It's just that they failed. And as someone who has failed at artistic things, and has plenty of experience with choosing to do things the hard way in hopes of creating something truly special and not always succeeding, I can relate to this failure, and honestly, I sympathise with the developers involved, as it must have been hard being on the receiving end of so much anger in a time when anger on the internet hadn't become quite so commonplace. And with that, the ending has officially been discussed. Wow, that took a while. If you were not satisfied with this discussion, be sure to leave a comment telling me why I'm wrong about this one minor detail and how that invalidates every other part of this video. I won't respond to that comment, I probably won't even read it, but it might make you feel better. And as for my personal quest to enjoy the Mass Effect trilogy like I was always meant to, and finally join the ranks of the Mass Effect fandom, well, I have some bad news. Would you believe me if I told you that so far on this journey, I have tried to be positive? Not all the time, obviously. I've just spent 2,000 words complaining about the third game's ending. And you also have to consider that I might not be a very positive person, and maybe that's just who I am. But there has been an attempt to be less negative. An attempt I didn't make when I first played these games. And so I've forgiven old problems, and found new ones, but I've found plenty to like as well. But something was still wrong. I haven't talked about this yet, but for this whole second playthrough, I've felt like I was missing something that everybody else who loves these games has. And I think I know what it is. A problem that has been swimming in my periphery, making its presence known without ever stepping into the spotlight. This story, this fantasy of the ultimate hero saving the galaxy against all the odds, winning the love and respect of all around them in the process, touching the lives of millions, always for the better. This story of the chosen one, the commander, the first human Spectre, the Prothean Cypher, the resurrected, the slayer of Reapers, the only one who can get shit done. This story wasn't doing it for me. The relationship between the player and their character is important in an RPG. Even when they're not exactly your character, you still need to feel a connection to get the most from the experience. You need to be able to relate to them, to feel the choices you make and the consequences they bring are shared between you, and to see a part of yourself in their reflection. And Commander Shepard, my Commander Shepard, didn't do that for me. Every single decision they made, even the hardest ones, felt correct. I mean, not once does this series ever seem to punish you for taking the idealistic path, which is the path I walked as part of his Paragon playthrough. I had tried to do the right thing, and I'd succeeded, with ease every single time. In Shepard's darkest moment, they die, and then rise from the dead like some second coming of Christ. And that's not the only parallel that can be drawn between these two figures. Every major character that comes into contact with Shepard seems to grow from the experience. In Mass Effect 1, Rex is a disillusioned mercenary, Tali is a young, inexperienced pilgrim, Garrus is a security guard, and Liara is a naive and socially inept researcher. And then, by the end of Mass Effect 2, Rex is the most powerful leader of the Krogan who is getting ready to unite his people for the first time in years. Tali is a respected admiral and technological genius. Garrus is a legendary vigilante taking on the entirety of Omega's underworld on his own. And Liara is the Shadow Broker, possibly the most powerful figure in the galaxy, not named Commander Shepard. These characters were just normal people until they met Shepard. And even minor NPCs don't escape his miraculous presence untouched. In Mass Effect 3 you can walk past people arguing in the Citadel, hearing debates over complicated issues relating to the Reaper invasion, and with just the press of a single button, Shepard butts into their conversation, gives a single line of advice, and problem solved. Thank you for this blessing, O wonderful Shepard. I wouldn't be surprised if in their freed time, Shepard keeps themselves busy by turning water to wine and feeding 5,000 Krogan from a single Presidium fish. And have you ever seen Shepard in trouble? The weight of the galaxy is on their shoulders, but have you ever seen them buckle under the pressure, or seen them scared, or experienced a single moment of doubt? This character isn't just perfect, they're like some messiah, taking up arms to stop this unimaginably powerful god, which they do, only to then possibly take control of these gods as servants, or merge their consciousness with the Crucible to combine all organic and synthetic life to create a new type of being, literally giving birth to a new form of life. And my god, this is meant to be me, this is who I am meant to relate to. Maybe I was just having a bad week, or a bad month, or bad year. Maybe this is all on me, but I ended up hating Shepard, and I hated the writing for portraying a character in a world that so clearly didn't resemble my own. And so, I'd failed in my quest to love this trilogy. And the sad thing was that it's pretty obvious I'd traded in one set of biases for another, and just as my original playthrough was a reflection of my past self, this new one had somehow ended up being tarnished by the person I am today. Which means this video, this experience, this month-long chapter in my life was a failure. But maybe that just meant I still had a way to go. Okay, time to take some responsibility, to put right that which felt wrong, and do things differently. And not just when it comes to Shepard. For starters, the Legendary Edition was released for a reason, so why not enjoy its improvements? Also, no more going out of my way to do content that I know is bad. I mean, no one loves these games for the Mako sections or the planet scanning, so time to ignore that stuff. And no need to read all the codex entries, or go through every optional dialogue choice like I did last time, as that knowledge is still safely stored in my mind. No need to search every inch of every level either, I know where I'm going and what I'll need. Time to focus only on the good parts, and enjoy a better paced, more consistently high quality experience. Still, most important of all, it's time to make Shepard truly my own. And I don't mean in appearance. I did try to make a custom character that looked like me, but good luck with that in Mass Effect's Mr. Potato Tier character creator. Also, I once made a Fallout 4 character with my exact likeness for a video, and the comments about his appearance were surprisingly mean. This Shepard also won't be me in terms of personality. People are complicated creatures, and no game can accurately portray a wide range of intricate personalities through something as simple as a few intermittent dialogue choices. No, instead, I was simply going to make a Shepard that's flawed. My logic was that if in the last playthrough I tried to do the right thing at every opportunity, and succeeded, then this playthrough, all I would need to do is take all the opposite choices. This doesn't mean I would always be making the wrong choice, because Mass Effect isn't written with a clear right-wrong binary, but it would be as close as I could come, and would hopefully lead to a more unpredictable and personal journey. I envisioned my Shepard not as evil, but instead as just a bit useless. He is the worst man for the saving the galaxy job, a selfish, careless, incompetent mess who was in over his head before any Reapers even entered the equation, and so now copes with the pressure by lashing out at anyone around him and drowning his sorrows any way possible. He wields his tough guy, renegade demeanour like a shield, hoping to deflect any accusations of incompetence through angry overcompensation, but this just leads to more mistakes. He tells himself it's all for the greater good, that he had no choice, that it was the only way, but deep down he knows this isn't true, that there's always a choice, and he just made the wrong ones. He's lonely and sad, but he's not able to let anyone in. He hates the galaxy for what it's done to him, for the burdens that he's been forced to bear. He wants to escape, but how? Who else is there? The Council, the Alliance, the aliens, none of them ever seem to do anything. It's as if it has to be him, and all he can hope is that maybe a bad leader might still be better than no leader at all. No idea where I got the inspiration from for such a character, by the way. I guess I'm just creative. But enough with the explanations. We've got a whole galaxy to save, as badly as humanly possible. It doesn't take long for the change in Shepard to be apparent. As I'm now no longer picking the options I want, but instead just doing the opposite, it feels more akin to watching a character in a movie. There's an uneasiness to witnessing Shepard's actions, as if you can't be sure how far he'll go and wish he'd just stop being such a dick to everyone. I like it. Shepard is now slightly racist.
That Hanar refuses to listen to reason. Why can't it act in an orderly and lawful manner?
Because it's a big, stupid jellyfish.
But I feel it gives his character a bit more depth, and in the second game, the racist angle to conversation choices is pretty much removed, which I like to think is as a result of Shepard's growth as a character from the time he spent with your alien companions in the first game. In Mass Effect 2, the bottom or renegade options portray Shepard as even more of an asshole, to the point where it can start to feel over the top and more like a caricature than a real character.
Shepard? Is that... you're alive?
Talizora, you served on my ship. You know what I do to people who threaten me.
But I guess the pressure is ramping up, and maybe that's just having an effect on the guy. What can I say? I'm feeling the new Shepard. Not really a fan of the red eyes and glowing scars though. It's like my face is literally emanating evil energy, and faces don't do that, that's not how bad things work. But otherwise, renegades can be a lot of fun.
You found Rachni on Nevaria?
Found them and wiped them out. Do you take pleasure from committing genocide, Shepard?
Depends on the species, Turian.
The Legendary Edition also brings some positive changes, particularly in Mass Effect 1, where a range of improvements to both aiming and the Mako make the previous golfing gameplay between the first and second game much less noticeable. With a new speed boost, quicker zooming, smoother steering, and aiming that is now based solely on the aiming reticule's position and not turret direction, the Mako isn't quite as bad. I mean, it's still the same generic content on lifeless planets against predictable enemies, but I missed the Mako. Other changes come in the form of quality of life improvements, which often have a knock-on effect on making each game slightly easier in some way, Like how in Mass Effect 2, picking up ammo clips now fully restores your ammunition. I do appreciate the larger inventory limit in the first game, but many other changes feel a bit unnecessary. Graphics and, for the first game, the UI have also had a makeover, but it made a smaller difference to my experience than I expected. The original games really haven't aged badly, and a few things, like certain character models, actually looked better before. Still, the improved combat in the first game alone makes the Legendary Edition feel mostly worth it, and with all the DLC included, it's certainly not bad value. But I'm not really doing this playthrough for the Legendary Edition, so time to make some terrible decisions. You may think the loss of choice from playing this way would irreversibly harm the experience. After all, this game is meant to be all about making choices, and now my choices are virtually predetermined. But hasn't it always been that way? BioWare's decision to include a binary morality system has always pushed players towards predetermined paths, because it's always made sense to play as either a Paragon or a Renegade character, as the higher your morality rating in either one, the more dialogue options you unlock, and these impact some of the biggest moments in the game. I mean, always choosing one or the other instead of a mix of both can be the difference between whether your party members live or die, and there's no incentive to play any other way. The third game does punish you less by combining Paragon and Renegade scores in the form of reputation, but I don't see why players needed to be punished in the first place. And even outside of the actual Paragon or Renegade choices, players are still encouraged to choose specific dialogue options, because those at the top of the wheel often give Paragon points, and those on the bottom often give Renegade points. And just in case you missed this, a pop-up appears showing your increase in points after every conversation, as if it's reminding you to stop thinking for yourself and start playing the way the game is designed towards. Things get even more extreme in Mass Effect 2 with the introduction of quick time event morality-based interrupts. Here, you won't even know what it is you're opting in to do by pressing the flashing button, but you better press it anyway, because otherwise you might miss out on content and have a lower morality score in the moments where it matters most. These QuickTime events don't even make much sense at times. When fistfighting James for fun in the third game, something you strangely have no option to decline, you get both Paragon and Renegade pop-ups, and both lead you to fighting back. But why? How can the exact same action in the exact same scenario sometimes be Paragon and sometimes be Renegade? Even the idea of QuickTime events during conversations is something I'd be against, but the incorporation of morality into it makes it even worse. I want to think about what to do in situations, not just press a flashing button on command. I honestly believe the entire Paragon Renegade system had no place in these games in the first place. It only serves to diminish choice by incentivizing players to always pick the same responses, instead of thinking for themselves. And choices between be nice or be an asshole don't make for very engaging choices to begin with. I mean, it's no coincidence that all the best choice in this series are the ones that avoid the binary morality system to instead present morally grey situations where the right things aren't always obvious. So why couldn't the entire game be that way? This is one of the biggest flaws with this series in my opinion. It's something I've always hated, and no forced positivity on my second playthrough could ever change that. But seeing as there's no way to play these games without the Paragon Renegade system, you might as well embrace it. Which is what I tried to do by envisioning my shepherds as people who might follow one path or the other, but would also still feel like they have more to their personality than just Paragon or Renegade. And this time, it was going pretty well. I kill the last Rachni in the galaxy on Noveria. It was nothing personal, I just don't really trust bugs. On Feros I went even further. I could have used incapacitating gas grenades on the colonists, and there wasn't much reason not to, but I didn't. I wanted to play it safe. So I shot them down where they stood, every last one of them. Hey, it was self-defense, at least so I told myself. Overall, things are going pretty smoothly though, and with no side quests to slow me down, I'm making good progress on my quest to stop Saren. Things change on Vermeer though. When Rex learns that Saren might have a cure for the genophage, and that Shepard is going to destroy the facility, it leads to a standoff. Rex is furious. If you ever speak to him before this, you can find out that his indifferent mercenary persona is just a facade to hide how much he cares about the fate of his people, and now Shepard stands in the way of this. It doesn't matter whether you go Paragon or Renegade here, both paths will allow you to talk Rex down pretty easily. But this playthrough is about doing the opposite of what's right, and talking Rex down isn't the only option.
Commander, are you all right?
No, I'm not. I can't believe he'd turn on us.
What happened?
Oh, Rex. You were always my favourite companion. You were meant to become the greatest leader your people had ever witnessed. You were meant to cure the genophage yourself, later, and in doing so rescue your entire species from the brink of destruction. You were meant to stand by my side as we saved the galaxy together. You were meant to have everything. But instead, your story will end on a forgotten beach on an unimportant planet where you die as a hero to no one, shot down by the man who was meant to be your friend. I've never killed Rex before. I've never even seen it happen. It surprised me that he didn't even fight back. I always thought he'd at least go down swinging. Rex didn't seem the type to just roll over and die, but maybe he didn't think I'd actually do it. Later on Vermeer, the player is forced to choose between saving Kaidan or Ashley. One of them has to die, but it's not your fault. The game forces you to sacrifice one, and as a result, that moment never felt very impactful to me. But this was different. No one had to die here, and the game isn't forcing the player's hand. This was all me, and I didn't expect to feel so bad about it afterwards. And I was only just getting started. I still stop Saren at the game's climax, but I don't save the Council. Why would I? What have they ever done for me? In Mass Effect 2, I decide I don't have time for any loyalty missions, as stopping the Collectors needs to take priority. Unfortunately, I eventually reach a point where I can't progress the main story any further, and need to do something to pass the time, so some loyalty missions get done. But I do my best to do a bad job. Sorry, Samara. On the Citadel, I overhear two Krogans talking about fish in the Presidium. One of them dreams of catching one. The other calls him an idiot. There are, of course, no fish on the Presidium, but I go and buy one from a gift shop and hand it to him, making him believe that I caught it upstairs. He seems happy. I wonder how he'd feel if he knew what I did to Rex, and how I may have doomed his entire race. On the Citadel, I drink until I pass out. No one says anything about it. I wonder if it's because they're embarrassed over the situation, or is it because they just don't care? During the final assault of the Collector base, Jack, Kazumi, and Thane die before we even land. Tali dies in the vents. Garrus dies leading the second team. Inside the Collector base, I reunite with the kidnapped crew. They're weak and they need someone to escort them back to the Normandy, and despite the deaths, I still have people to spare. But I don't send anyone. My team are here to fight, and we can go back for the rest of the crew later, if there's time. But there never is. In the final fight, more teammates survived than I expected. I wasn't actually sure who would make it. I did my best to not look up any extra details, and in my first 2 playthroughs, my natural completionist tendencies meant that across 2 playthroughs, I'd only lost 1 person. Now, I had lost more than half, and boy does it change the feel of this mission when you have no idea who's going to make it, and people are dying in every direction you look. It feels like how this mission was always meant to be, and made for a much more impactful ending than the last times. In Mass Effect 3, things start to get lonely. I only have 4 squad mates, and that's including the DLC character. For the first time in my life, I actually use James in some missions, and he's not even bad. One time I watched him do 1,365 pull-ups in a row, with no breaks. That's like over 5 times the current world record, and afterwards he wasn't even out of breath. That's pretty impressive. Everyone hates James because of the way he looks. I did too, once, but I don't anymore. By this point, I'm happy to take all the help I can get. On Tuchanka, I follow the Solarian leader's advice to sabotage the cure for the genophage. I mean, the Krogan don't seem like they can be trusted to me, and there's no need for them to know the cure doesn't work. There's a problem though. Mordin, a companion from Mass Effect 2 and one of the few who made it out alive, is helping me, and Mordin is not as easy to fool as the Krogan. In fact, Mordin was one of the main scientists responsible for creating the genophage. Since then, he's carried the burden of what he's done with him, and he's not about to let someone stand in the way of putting that wrong right after all this time. Mordin has always been one of the more unusual of your potential teammates. He's a genius but wildly eccentric. He talks in fragmented sentences, always jumping from one point to the next, as if life's just one big puzzle he's too impatient to take his time with. And he always views everything through a lens of scientific objectivity, being no stranger to the idea of the greater good.
Every time we've talked about this before, you've defended the genophage. Hell, you destroyed Malin's data. How can you change your mind now?
I made a mistake!
This is the first time I ever see real emotion from him, but it doesn't matter. I can't let him get in the way of what needs to be done. I call his bluff. Or does he call mine? Either way, I lost.
I don't have a choice here. Walk away, or I will fire.
Not your decision, not your work, not your cure. Had to be me. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. No time to argue. Cure dispersal imminent. Must counteract sabotage. Stop me if you must.
Mordin always talked about the greater good. He'd understand, right?
Warning, temperature malfunction detected. Warning, temperature malfunction detected. Not yet. Not yet. No. Not ready.
no one knew what I did on Tuchanka. The Krogan think they were saved that day. I just wish I didn't have to see them celebrating or hear them thanking me. On the Citadel, Cerberus tried to kill the Council. I thought I'd already done that in the first game. Oh well, no point letting them die a second time, but I'm too late to save the Solarian Councillor. When I reach the rest, Ashley, the woman I saved over Kaiden on Vermeer, thinks it was me who murdered the Solarian. Idiot, there's only one Solarian I've ever murdered. But she has doctored video evidence, provided by a traitor in our midst, a man I once put forward to be the human representative on the council. I guess that wasn't my best decision. Still, it's not exactly my worst. But this is a problem. I'm here to save the council, but Ashley thinks I'm here to kill them, and if I don't stop the traitor, we might all die. Still, video or not, Ashley knows me. We served together, we stopped Saren together, I once saved her life. She knows me. Oh. Fuck. She knows me. I was looking forward to having Ashley as a companion. I'd always went the Kaiden route, and I thought this time I'd finally get to see what she's like in Game 3. I didn't even know this could happen. But hey, it's not the first time I've killed a friend. I think I might be getting used to it by now. And anyway, she should have stood down. Why didn't she just stand down?
I hope the Reapers send you to hell.
On Rannoch, I hear the arguments of neither Tali nor Legion because neither of them made it this far. I still kill the Geth though. I mean, why not? I've killed so many others by this point. What makes them special? Soon, the ending to this story will be upon me. The Crucible is complete. Earth beckons, and I keep on going. Eventually, I reach the Catalyst. He tells me I need to make a choice to decide the future of all life in the galaxy, but I don't know what to do to save the galaxy. I never did. Sometimes I get this sense of déjà vu, as if I've done all this before, except everything was okay. In this distant dream, no one died, and I faced all these same difficult decisions, yet somehow I always made the right call. I'm haunted by this dream, but there's something else I remember. I've seen this place before. I've seen this choice. And I remember that while multiple paths stand before me, only one of them will save me. I have no idea what's best for the galaxy, but I don't want to die. Not here, after all this. I ignore the Catalyst's advice. Destroy. It has to be destroy. It's what I was always meant to do. It's what I've done all along. I raise my gun, and I shoot. At least, this way I'll survive, I think to myself. But I don't. I didn't know that could happen. One last thing I got wrong, I guess. At least, that's how I wanted this playthrough to end, but that's a lie. I never got to the Catalyst, because before taking on the Reapers, there was still one last thing I had to do. The Mass Effect series has lots of DLC, and until now I haven't really talked much about them. That's because they tend to be fine. They serve as short, high-quality, self-contained adventures, although I found their limited duration often prevented them from reaching their true potential. For example, in Leviathan, you meet a creature that predates the Reapers, which is a truly monumental discovery, and then after a short conversation, it's just over. In some ways, the self-contained, added-on nature of downloadable content just doesn't feel like a particularly good fit for a trilogy that's meant to be the opposite. But there's an exception. The Citadel was the final piece of DLC BioWare released for these games, and it's much longer than any of the others. In it, Shepard finds himself on shore leave while waiting for repairs to the Normandy, and so sets off to take a well-deserved break, only to be immediately interrupted by mercenaries being led by your evil twin. You then get the gang back together, kick Evil U's arse, and then throw a massive party with every important character in the series. It is a whale of a good time. This extended love letter to fans is packed full of comedy and fan service that manages to be surprisingly self-aware to the point where it often borders on clever satire, while still managing at other times to feel heartfelt and sincere. I hated it. This was my first time playing this DLC, and even during a normal playthrough, I imagine the tonal disconnect between it and the rest of the game must be severe, but this wasn't a normal playthrough, and I wasn't finding 4 hours of Mass Effect the sitcom was having the effect it was intended to.
Shepard, your clone has entered the ship and is attempting to...
Edie?
I'm okay.
Really?
Hey, Grunt. Remember that time I tricked your species into thinking they weren't going to slowly die? You see, it's funny because they actually are. Hey, Joker, do you remember all of our old crew? You know, in the second game, and how I just left them to die in the Collector's base when I could have easily saved them?
Seriously though, don't go there.
Hey, guys, remember all the good times we've had together? Wasn't it fun? Aren't we just the greatest, wackiest bunch? It was here, on the Citadel, at this party, that my third playthrough, my final playthrough, died. I was telling my story this time, but only to myself. These characters still think I'm Commander Shepard the hero, but I'm not. I killed people when trying to do the right thing, but I also killed people I could have saved. I've killed out of carelessness, anger and spite. A couple of times I killed people just for fun. And I killed friends more than once. And no one cares. All this time, 3 games and hundreds of wrong decisions, no one, not a single person of the many team members who have come and gone, have ever said one word about any of it. No one has treated me differently, and it's not like I treated them the same. I've been rude and disrespectful every chance I had. One time it was acknowledged. It was with Ashley after the very first mission in the game. She wanted to know if I had a problem with her. I kind of did, but something like this never happened again. When I recruited Samara, I asked her if she had to do everything I say because of her code. It sounded like I wanted to use my new power over her to force her to sleep with me. That's fucked up. She didn't seem to care. I only spoke to her once after recruiting her. This was when she gave me her loyalty quest, a quest that relates to her lifelong mission, her entire purpose for everything she does, her duty to kill her daughter. I told her I didn't care and that we're not doing it. Of course, in the end I actually did do that quest, during which Samara says,
And Shepard, thank you. I do not share this burden easily, and you are the only soul I can imagine sharing it with.
A few minutes later, I helped her daughter kill her, just because I was curious to see what would happen, but nice to know she liked me, at least. And yeah, that's Mass Effect's characters. Everyone loves you, they look up to you, they want to sleep with you, and they think you're the greatest, and none of your choices matter at all. At least, to these characters they don't. And what about all your other choices? This is a series all about choice. It was designed as a trilogy from its inception, all so it could better deliver on the promise of choices that really mattered. And some of them are brilliant, like with the Genophage or the Geth, but others, even some of the most important choices in the game, have no impact at all. Like whether you kill the last remaining Rachni Queen on Nevaria, a decision that was meant to determine the fate of an entire species, but either way, the Rachni show up again in the third game as Reaper-controlled enemies. In a side quest in that game you can meet the Queen again, and either free her from Reaper control, or kill her. And if you already killed her on Novaria, you just meet a different Queen, and then get the same choice. Same with killing the Council at the end of the first game. This is a group who play a huge role in the narrative. They are literally the leaders of the galaxy, and yet the only impact their death has is whether you see one short, unimportant scene with them in the second game. And either way, they just show up again in the third game and treat you exactly the same. The choice between making Anderson or Udina the human representative on the council is also pointless, and likewise gets completely ignored in the third game. And the major choice at the end of the second game, whether to give the collector base to the elusive man or destroy it, is similarly meaningless. For a lot of minor choices, the only consequence is an extra email in a later game, or running into an old NPC who has a couple of lines of dialogue about your decision that mean nothing. For Paragon and Renegade choices in quests, most just lead to the same outcome, with the only difference being what Shepard actually says. And then we come to character deaths. If a character dies, it will have an impact, but it's not an interesting one. For several important characters, their death just means they get replaced with a less interesting supermarket brand version in the next game. Kill Rex and Reeve takes his place, with everything playing out the same. Let Mordrin die in Game 2 and you get a new Solarian scientist to help with the Genophage, and everything plays out the same. Hand Legion over to Cerberus instead of recruiting him, and you meet Legion version 6 at Rannoch, and it's all the same. But for most characters it's worse. Their deaths just mean you miss out on the content that they would feature in, and nothing is added to replace that content. This makes these choices feel less like opportunities for player expression and more like choices between right and wrong, because if you don't make the right choice, you get to see less of the game. The Ashley Caden choice is different. This choice does have a large impact and will change your playthrough as it changes who will join you in the final game, but this is an exception. For most choices, the simple reality is that they don't matter, or that they only matter because the wrong choice removes content. And that is disappointing. And this is not exactly the result of a lack of effort from BioWare. Many scenes have an insane number of variables. Take the party in the Citadel DLC, where so many extra lines of dialogue must have been recorded just to allow it to occur regardless of what combination of characters are alive or invited. Or what about the suicide mission, where every party member can potentially die, including Shepard? The effort taken to account for so many choices in this game is, at times, staggering, but the positive impact can still be minimal when major choices, like whether to save the Council, don't even matter, and the most important choice of all, which is what kind of person your Commander Shepard is, isn't even acknowledged by anyone. And that's why, even on my third playthrough, I still failed at loving these games. I came so close, particularly this time. I really did find a new way to enjoy these games, while also appreciating the vastness of the choices in this series in a way I've never been able to before. But at the same time, I also found new problems with the limitations of those choices, and ultimately, I just ended up right where I started, complaining about the Mass Effect trilogy for not being the type of RPG I always wanted it to be. Fuck. So, was this whole video pointless? Well, I don't know. Maybe the real point was the friends I made along the way, who I then killed. I went out of my way to kill them actually. I had to play the entire trilogy again. 10 days of my life was spent doing just that, all so I could kill them. And then I made my own twisted fanfic about their deaths. It's like I took pleasure in their deaths as they happened, and then I took that pleasure and nurtured it to make it grow into something even more pleasurable. So maybe the real point wasn't the friends I made along the way. God, what was the point in this video? Can I really admit, after all this time, that this video doesn't have a point, and it never did, that I just wanted to make something people on the internet might find entertaining while talking about things that seemed interesting to me? Nah. Okay, look, the premise of this entire video was flawed from the beginning. People don't just erase all their biases just by acknowledging them, and there's no reason why I need to love these games. It's okay to not be the biggest fan of all the biggest things, and it's okay for people to like different things for different reasons. That's just how life is, and if someone can't accept that, then that's on them. But I'm a critic, and you could say I'm not a very good one, but that doesn't change the fact that somehow that's what I am. This is my job, and I don't really know how to be a critic. I just played lots of games, and then one day decided I wanted to write about that. And here I am. Still, I have at least learned some things in my time doing this. One of which is that anyone can dislike something. Disliking is the easy part, and the less you know about it, the easier disliking it becomes. So, maybe to be a good critic, you have to try to do the opposite. And that doesn't mean you'll succeed, but you won't know if you don't try. So that's what I did. And yeah, maybe I failed at liking these games quite as much as I intended. This certainly wasn't how I envisioned this project would end up when I started it. But it's through failure that we learn things. And maybe that's what being a critic is actually about. Trying to learn from failure. And failure or not, this video still says something. Something about Mass Effect, and something about me. And hopefully people might still find that interesting. I hope there are more Mass Effect games in the future. These games were originally BioWare's opportunity to create their own universe after so long spent working within other people's, and when it comes to that particular point at least, they absolutely smashed it out of a goddamn park. Within this series is the DNA of something truly special, and I have an idea for how they can achieve it. Actually, it's simple. They just need to look at each of these games and take the best parts from each one. Combine the world-building RPG element and exploration from the first with the character focus and aesthetics from the second, and the gameplay design from the third. Easy. Of course, things did end up pretty messy in the Mass Effect universe, what with all those different possible endings of the third game, but I'm sure they could find a way to still make it work. In fact, why not just go to a new galaxy? Free yourself from the burden of the original trilogy. You could even make the game about that first journey into that new galaxy. And there could be a whole new cast of characters with new races and planets to discover, and with a greater thematic focus on exploration, which was always the area with the most untapped potential, and no more Reapers dominating every part of the narrative, and no more Paragon Renegade system, and bring back the Mako and planetary exploration, just do it better this time. God, this game sounds amazing. It would need a name though, you couldn't just call it Mass Effect 4. But why not name it after the new galaxy to make it clear what the game's actually going to be about? What are some names of other galaxies? Let's have a look. Andromeda Galaxy. Aha! I've got it. It can be called Mass Effect Canis Major Dwarf. It's literally perfect. Not even BioWare could mess it up. As always, thank you for watching.